We ready? Good morning. Call this workshop of the CROA Board of Directors to order. Move to adopt the agenda. Thank you, Debbie. And a second.
Second.
From Brian. Thank you. I just have to see you. I have to see who's on the other side of Debbie. All in favor? Aye. And hearing no objections, just a couple of comments before we get started for today. Today's a long day. We are taping this for live stream and for review after the fact. We have a lot to cover. We're looking at the budget, the operational budget for 2019 for CROA and for CJC, where much of the funding comes from, and I know Brian will explain that to us. There will be some periodic opportunities as we move through the agenda and for public comment. We're going to offer a couple of minutes at the very beginning if someone has something to say looking forward. But we do need to stay on track. If we're going to finish, which we will, by 5 today. If we don't finish, we will have to reconvene to finish, because that all is dependent on a timeline, and then I'm sure Steve will go over, remind us of the timeline in terms of the future.
Right.
What we need to do this week and next week. So first of all, any public comment? I know that Mike, you had something to say. I think Dory had something to say. And if you would come to the microphone, I don't care. Each is pointing to the other to go first. What'd you say, women first? Just for the public. Oh.
You're such a gentleman.
So
Right
just yeah, please, right there, and just as brief as you can, please.
Okay, I will. I'll try to be very quick.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
My name's Dory Moyer. I live at 515 Resale Circle. I am here today as a resident. I do not come here on behalf of any committee, any other board, or anyone. I am here as a task force of one. And a resident who was out of town had contacted me, asked me some questions. I looked into it, and this is the result. Okay, and for some of you, I know I'm going to probably push some buttons. Please don't throw darts at me. I'm just voicing an opinion. Okay, for almost 10 weeks, the CDD posted this on the Friday Flash. Nothing on here discussed that you could read and know that the board on August 14th was going to make a suggestion to the county to start removing turn lanes on Celebration Avenue. They're starting with 3. Jack, I think you were at that meeting. They're starting with 3. They came up with this review, which states on here they're proposing to remove the turn lanes starting at Mirasol, although they call it Arbor Circle. On the form, it evidently was number 1, pedestrian and bicycle safety on Celebration Avenue, review the concept plan to improve pedestrian and bicycle safety throughout striping and traffic calming. My point is that's the first one, then they're doing another one by Mulberry, and then they're going up to Campus Street. Our streets are already clogged, dysfunctional as it is. This is only going to make it worse. It is going to be dangerous. And even though they quoted in this fact finding that it's a way to slow traffic, they must have forgotten that on this study here by the U.S. Department of Transportation, one way to slow traffic is to put in left turn lanes because it does reduce rear end and side swiping crashes. Based on the U.S. Department of Transportation, changing in directional turn lanes to single lanes triples accidents of rear end crashes. I am talking about the safety of our residents in this town, and I think that by turning the lanes that are 1 lane with turn lanes into 7-foot bicycle lanes and 9-foot roadways is going to be dangerous to our residents. And I think that a lot of this was that was stated was basically, this post I thought was cloaked in new urbanism folly, and I think that it was deceitful because the residents had no idea when they read that what they were going to propose, and they sent it already to the county. And I think that we need to go in and talk to the county, and they may not do it because it's going to cost a lot of money to come in and redo that whole roadway, but I think it's very unsafe. And
So if I may interrupt, just to be clear, because it sounded like you were ending,
I
right?
am.
Okay, so just to be clear, you're presenting to the CROA board for the reason of?
I would like to ask that maybe the task force could be expanded to more than one, or we could have a representative from the CROA board speak to the county, go to the county, and when they have this meeting, we show up in force and say, no, don't make these types of changes. They are not advantageous to this community in any way. And the study that was done on that specific corner was done in summer. It was not during school. It was during when Snowbird's away, and it was a Snowbird who had contacted me. And Mirasol's transitioning from rentals to condos. There are buildings that are almost completely empty. So that to make the decision but they did not say how many bicycles were going by there. They only talked about how many turns, and they only did it for, I think, a 2-hour study per day. And I just think that it is something that we need to discuss for the safety of our residents.
So I assume that your points have been shared with the CDD, which is really overseeing, am I correct? That
No, I just found out about this. The
not
study was not.
Not overseeing the roads? Is that not?
I'm sorry?
the
I'm
CDD?
going tomorrow to the meeting.
Okay,
and
these will be
stating my
shared
case.
tomorrow with the CDD.
I am going to state my
Okay.
case to them as well, but I just thought that it's something important that for our residents, that safety and the flow of traffic in this town needs to, that the CROA board needs to be a part of that decision. It should not have been a decision made, I think.
Okay.
That's my opinion.
Needs to discuss and vocalize our opinions, as
Yes.
we have on some other safety issues.
And especially if they plan to move it all the way down Celebration Avenue. This is just the first phase,
First
and that
phase.
is stated here as well, Phase 1.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dora.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Thanks for enduring my questions. Anyone other comments from the board at this point?
I spoke to the CDD about that last week,
Okay.
but I was just an airline pilot, so I got no recognition from the architect.
And the CDD's, for clarity, the CDD's board meeting was shifted from a week from tomorrow to tomorrow, September 11th? Yeah. Thank you for the reminder. Mike, thank you.
Hi, Mike Jackson, 413 Sycamore Street. I'm here today on behalf of the Pickleball Group. I think you all know that I'm a pretty avid racquetball player, and now I'm finding my body slowing down, and pickleball's a little bit slower and a little bit less stressful than racquetball, so that's my new sport, or at least another sport parallel. There's some pickleball members here today. Wave your hands in the back. So these are people that have an interest. Dave Eastman is a co-founder of the Pickleball Club, so there was 3 people that founded it, so Dave was a co-founder of the Pickleball Club. So last week I sent you a copy of the Pickleball Club story and a short PowerPoint, so you got a chance to see the materials, so I'm not going to spend time on all of that. We also did meet with Steve a week ago Friday, I think, Steve, and Dave and I, and spent time with Steve and got his input on a few items with the material. So I just want to highlight a couple of items and then take any questions or comments that I know we're pressed for time, so very quickly. As you saw in the material, we currently play pickleball. Pickleball, it's hard to say too, at the Georgetown tennis courts, and we put up and take down the nets every time we do it. And we have 4 nets there, and we're at approximately 50 members, and the play is a little bit softer now during the summer, but we do get backed up. People can't play, they have to wait for a time to get out of the court and so on, so we've outgrown that location. We've identified and seen the 3 tennis courts on the K-8 property. I think some of you have probably looked at them since I put out the material. They are quite an eyesore when you go back there and you look at them in their condition. You saw some of the pictures of the courts that I put into the presentation.
And where are those at?
They're right by where the ball field is, the baseball diamond. So just to the left of the baseball diamond, you come in the driveway, the fencing's there, and that leads into the point that it's a nice location because it can be secured with the school fencing. So the gate can close, be locked, all of that, and you can still access the courts to play pickleball without going onto school property. So if there was an issue with wanting to lock off the school property, the gating and the fencing is there. One little door would have to be cut in the final court, but it's a piece of cake to do it. The configuration that you saw would probably be 4 courts on 2 of those tennis courts. So 4 pickleball courts on 2 tennis courts, that would give us 8 courts. We currently have 4 with temporary nets and everything, so that would double the capacity. The third location, we would suggest you'd stripe it as a tennis court and pickleball, and we would use our portable nets or our temporary nets, so we could expand to 12 courts actually available, and it could be used for tennis then, in the time period when it wasn't being used for pickleball. As far as lighting goes, there is no lighting on those courts, but there are poles that light the parking lot that back right up to the tennis court, so power is there, poles are there. For the most part, you might have to add a few poles, but lighting could be an option. Obviously, that would raise the price of anything you would do there. We think it's an excellent opportunity to clean up this location and return it to a usable amenity within the community. From very preliminary diligence, and you saw this if you picked out some numbers, very, very preliminary, and I say this very cautiously, we think it would take about $100,000 to resurface the courts and acquire the permanent structures for the pickleball courts, the equipment. Steve, I think, has shared a number of $45,000. That's very preliminary. We need to verify a lot of things, and then I'm guessing another $40,000, $50,000 worth of equipment and installation. If you consider lighting, then the total project could probably approach $150,000. That's my guess at this point. What I'm here for today on behalf of the Pickleball Club to ask for is give Steve direction to have him work with a few of us from Pickleball to perform some more due diligence and put together a comprehensive plan with good solid numbers for your review that would convert those courts to a pickleball option with tennis and clean them up. That's it. Questions? Oh, by the way, this is the equipment, so if any of you want to come out and play, this is what it's all about.
You know, when people come up here, they offer the board free rackets and stuff like that.
If you come and play, Jack, I'll give you this racket.
Steve, in our local use agreement with the school board, where do we stand with those particular courts?
The facility use agreement that we currently have with the school board allows us to make capital improvements to their property. They'll always have first right to use the property, so if they have curriculum coursework that requires use of those courts, they'd have first priority over that. And then if they were to have any type of after-school activities that needed those facilities, they'd have first. And then the other thing you have to consider, any capital dollars you invest in the school property, you're responsible for maintenance and upkeep of that property throughout the life of it. So that's the way that the deal was written. But there would be no facility usage fees once you put the capital dollars into it, though. You'd have second right of booking on it, and then you'd be able to use it from there on out.
I would just question, what you gave us was 4 pickleball courts. I would think that when we created an amenity like this, it will become very popular, and probably we should be thinking on the order of 6. I know we talked about when we visited Highlands Community Center, they had a very active pickleball community using the inside gymnasiums pickleball courts. You know, where they
Yep.
took a basketball court and set two things there, and that was booked solid all day long. So I would consider that as another source that we might be able to do if we build a community center that has a gymnasium. But in the meantime, I think the dynamics of pickleball, the way it's going to grow, and if you make it obvious for people that it's there, we're probably going to need 6 courts.
Jack, we have the capacity for 12 there, so it would be 8 permanent and then 4 portable. It'd be set up and taken down. It'd be
From the
set-
tennis court.
Each tennis court can hold 4 courts in the quadrants.
For you or for somebody from the audience who's part of your club, how popular is pickleball? I don't honestly know. How much would this grow? How much, if we're gonna spend $100,000, how much would it really get used?
Yeah, Tim?
I just happened to visit the villages this summer. They have 282 pickleball courts.
282 in the villages, 282 pickleball courts in the villages.
And they're about 10 times bigger than us, too.
And I got to tell you,
Okay.
Sola Vita has dedicated pickleball courts. Parmy has dedicated pickleball courts. It is a popular game now.
So
It's the
that could be
fastest growing
part-
sport in America today.
Well, I think
That
that
could be part of Steve's.
what we run into here, though, and what I want the board to consider as we go through budget work session today, because you're going to have a maintenance operation conversation, but you're going to start seeing some projects that are probably going to go into a parking lot to talk about how you fund them from capital perspective moving forward.
Right.
And I have a feeling if tennis knew that there was a push for pickleball, they'd be here to tell you that tennis is the most important. So we have to reprioritize, and we have to go through a facilities master planning process to do it fair and equitably, to where we spend the dollars of the community to meet the needs of the community. And I fully imagine pickleball is gonna float really high, because I hear it from them, and once you start hearing it, you know that there's a need in that community for it. So, I don't think that it's gonna get pushed down and there won't be amenities here, but I think to keep it somewhat organized and not have every group here yelling down your throats that their amenities are the most important, we have to go through that facilities master plan process.
Right. But this is very helpful.
Good.
Who covers the insurance on something like that?
It would be through
Liability
us.
insurance.
Not for kids from school. The school insurance would cover that, but when we're running programming there, it would be our insurance that would cover it.
Okay, so when we're not scheduled, whoever goes onto those courts, even though we resurfaced and we did all that type of thing, we would not be.
Any capital dollars you invest in the school does not give you ownership of that facility. It's you fixing it up for the school, and then you get second usage of it over the next 10 years. Now, when 10 years ends, you have to enter in a new agreement or it goes away. You lose
Sure.
your capital
Your
dollars.
question's different, isn't it? Isn't your question like, if nothing is scheduled there and someone shows up, it could be a tourist, shows up and plays?
No, it'll be, we have full control over access to
Lock
where it's
off?
not just a walk-in. Yeah, I mean,
Oh,
we already
lock
have
off.
walk-off.
So it's a lock-off?
Facilities.
Okay.
We'd have to just come up with the rules and regulations for it.
So it'd be registered
We have
only?
people playing other sports at other parks too.
Sure.
I mean,
Yeah,
we
you sign
have
off.
this every day, every year.
Yeah,
No,
yeah, yeah.
it's, yeah, we would have full control over how we
Like dog
utilize the facilities.
It would be normal, just course of like we normally.
Secondary
Okay.
control.
So if we could have Steve work with us and put together a comprehensive package that you would then take a look at with the diligence, and we would obviously meet with the school and work with them, because I'm sure they're gonna want some programming, we can work that all out.
So-
With all
I think
due
we've seen
respect,
that you're putting
I
it
think
in
what
the
Steve just laid out, Mike, was a different proposal, which is that this goes into the parks master planning process. There's a lot of competing interests. This is a big dollar item. And I'm not saying it's not a great idea, but I am saying that there's a group of people in Artisan Park who could sit here today and say, we want a playground in Artisan Park. There are a number of competing interests, and I think if we're gonna do this properly, before we get management involved in helping you or any individual group set up a proposal, that we put it into the parks master planning process and figure out where it striates in. I trust your numbers. I mean, if you're telling us $100,000 to $150,000, that's enough for our planning purposes right now. But to go deeper gives the imprint that we are approving and moving forward and doing this in some way, that we're committing to it. And I'm not ready to make that commitment personally, not today.
And I would recommend, you're gonna see, as we go through this process today, what we're calling the parking lot, where we can start throwing some things up there. I know the dog park committee has asked for shades. It's not in our maintenance and operation budget, and it's not in anywhere on our existing facilities master plan. So my recommendation is throw that up there on the parking lot, throw the pickleball courts up on the parking lot, and I would agree with Mike's numbers. They're probably very close to what that's gonna end up costing you. And then that gives you a better picture, because your challenge here is going to be a depletion of capital funds, and then what the priorities are moving forward.
Can we just wait till I'm done with the financials?
yeah.
Because we're painting a picture that is not the accurate picture. So wait till I'm done, and then we can talk about money.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Anyone else?
Thank you.
Last call. Thank you.
Thanks.
Last call? All right, thank you. All right, let's move back to the outcome for today, Steve.
You have to stick around for the entire budget work session to be considered for the pickleball courts.
You didn't get your pickleball.
Trust me, you'll sweat more today than any other day.
Sweat equity.
Don't you know that door's locked now? That door's locked.
Yeah, you're in for the day, you're in for the day.
I was gonna go get you some beer.
Okay, you're in, back there.
It's unlocked. Thank you for,
The old Milwaukee.
Thanks, Mike.
and it's an old one.
Mike, I'm not sure what the money's gonna be, but can this be built in stages? Is this possible? If the money's not there, can we start with like a third, or a half and a half?
You can't do anything
I
until
mean,
you
you
resurface those courts and fix the
Well,
infrastructure.
that's what I'm asking. I mean,
Yes, you could phase in the equipment portion
but the resurfacing you do all at once, you do all 3 courts. You can phase in the equipment, which is gonna be pretty small.
Yeah, it's very small, it's very
Again,
minor.
Okay, let's look.
Again, let me go through
Yeah.
the numbers first. We're
So, yeah,
responding
Brian,
to a
go through the
situation
numbers.
and it's not real.
Let's let Brian-
Steve, can we put
I'll
ourselves in?
move us right along here then.
Get us back on track.
So the next item is outcome for the day. What management is looking for from the board is, as we go through this process, there's probably going to be some individual directives. We want to see one voice direction from the board. So once we start talking about individual items, we want to get consensus. And it doesn't have to be a vote on anything. We just want to make sure I see 4 heads nodding that that's the direction you want to move us in. We will then turn around and do the work from the direction we're given from this one voice meeting today. And then we'll schedule a follow-up meeting for early October. And hopefully that can be a much shorter budget work session where we're just finalizing and making sure that everyone's good with the final numbers. And then ultimately, our end game here is to get the board to vote and approve the 2019 budget at the October 24th meeting. So you can begin with the end in mind by knowing October 24th is that date that we're looking for. So for residents and audience members watching today, this is the preliminary draft budget based on that level of service meeting that we had. It doesn't mean that this is the final budget at all. There's going to be some more work as we go through this process.
Could I make a request, and if necessary, I'll make it as a motion, that for these meetings, the scheduled follow-up meeting in early October and the board vote and approval, that the budget numbers in the packet from management be in the hands of all the board members 5 days prior to the meeting. I'm just going to say publicly right now that I appreciate all the work that you all have done. Getting all of these numbers Friday afternoon at 4:30 in the afternoon, when management takes the weekend off, as they should, but expects the board members to work over the weekend to be prepared for this, is really a game of whack-a-mole, in which we just get hit with a data dump. And I don't feel prepared for today's meeting. I'm looking forward to Brian's presentation. I'm looking forward to all the presentations. But this isn't the way that it should be done. Is there a reason that we couldn't have these 5 days in advance?
Okay, so the reality of the matter is, Steve took a little time off, I took a little time off, which also plays into it, but we were going back and forth on numbers. Normally, at a corporation, which the corporation that I was the CFO for, we would come to one of these meetings and we would get all the exhibits out a little before the meeting, and everybody would give that same speech. And I'm not criticizing the speech, it's an appropriate speech. And I would spend a ton of time in a meeting answering questions ad nauseum, which is what I'm prepared to do today. And if you get into hard detailed questions, they're here. But at the end of the day, as I view today's meeting is about painting a picture. And not just of a tree. We're gonna put some grass underneath the tree, we're gonna have some leaves falling off the tree. The purpose, when I get up there to talk, will be for all of you to ask questions, for anybody out there that wants to ask questions, to ask questions. I did not expect you to come to this meeting understanding the budget. I think it would have been nuts, and you're not all CPAs, and you all are not being all accountants. Congratulations. So the purpose of today is that when we break up at 5 o'clock, you can say, I really understand the big picture, the pieces that I care about a lot, and then the last thing we can do today is say, okay, now to get into the detail, what do we need to do next? I'm expecting, in all honesty, that we're gonna come out of it today and be 95% of the way home. I'm gonna paint the picture that I think we ought to do. I'm 1 vote out of 7, I'll clearly say that, but then we have an open conversation. This shouldn't be a listening session, this should be a total Q&A session. And if we don't, I've talked like Todd about his thing, we need detail, like on Todd's at 800,000, what's gonna be there. But I wanna get to the big picture painted, take pictures from the audience, take pictures here, questions, sorry, so that we're literally getting to the detail. Yes, you got it late.
But would you object to us having a 5-day?
I would not object to you having it a little earlier, except it was, I'm just being honest, it was August and September.
Yeah, I'm
and
not
a
talking
couple
about
days
today's
off, and that's
meeting.
just
I'm
what
talking about the meetings that really count, the 2 meetings that are listed on the agenda here for early October and the board vote to approve the budget. I'm not going to vote to approve a budget that I don't see early enough for me to ask questions if I need to, if we're for 5% that hasn't gotten figured out. We're not doing our fiduciary duty if we get stuff dumped on us at the end. For today, it's fine. I plan to listen and ask questions, obviously. But for those 2 meetings, I would think it would be appropriate that this board insists that we get these materials in advance. And if that means changing the date of a board meeting or a workshop meeting, then move it back, but give us time.
Sorry, from a management perspective, it shouldn't be an issue getting these to you 5 days in advance. Even if you all need to, between now and our next meeting, schedule another meeting, we can get you the information. I mean, I think Brian's right. It's so much information, and this is really an educational picture painting meeting day. This isn't your final budget by any means. It could change 2 or 3 times between now and October 24th.
I'm happy to commit to 5 days on the other one.
One question, with each of these things, the department heads get information back to Susan and Steve, whatever the case is. How far do you have to review the information that the department head has given you? And does that leave Celebration? Does that go to CCMC corporate, anywhere else to review before it gets presented?
Yep, and we talked a little bit about this budgeting process at a few meetings ago, but what we did is they had about 2 weeks after our level of service meeting to develop their numbers. It is a zero-based budget, but a lot of it's historical because we do have contracts that drive some of these numbers. And then we spent the next week going over them through 2-3 hour meetings with each department head, asking questions, going back and forth. And then I spent the next 2 weeks working kind of back and forth with making sure these worksheets worked, going through Brian to make sure he understood them, going through CCMC at a corporate level and our accountant to make sure the formulas all worked. And ultimately, Brian ended up utilizing his own formula or own worksheet. So he'll talk a little bit more about that
And
also.
let me add to that. So it goes to Arizona because Arizona has this standard template that they use for everybody. And in my cover email, I said, yeah, and I don't know how many they manage. If they manage 1,000 homeowners associations, I can understand why they have a locked and loaded template that can't be changed. So I recreated the whole thing myself. Some of our hardest work was making sure that my numbers and their numbers were the same numbers, and there's actually some small differences even today. And we'll make that kind of work. I think mine is more user-friendly, theirs is more control environment friendly, which is a critical thing for them. So Arizona is not reviewing this to say, this is the budget they approve. They review this to say, okay, the template is working properly so that when your board comes back and says, here's your budget, it's gonna flow right into our whole mechanism.
Correct.
And the only reason why I asked that is, obviously, I'm walking into your show. This is the first time I'm going through this Celebration. But next year, typically I don't want to receive anything in piecemeal. I don't think anybody does. You want the whole picture. But certain things like the department heads, not for comments or anything, but just for us to start reviewing it and comprehending it and digesting it, it might not hurt to just see it as we're getting ready for next year's budget.
Good point. And the corporate template that we have it's intensive. It's got all kinds of data in there, and it really is up to working with the treasurer and management to determine what information is most important without completely confusing the process. So I get it, and what I want to talk to you about next is how do we reframe strategic focus across the board to get us the S word that we've been talking about, some sustainability as boards change year after year, as the town changes. You know, we strategically plan annually, which is more of a business plan than it is a strategic plan, and say, look at what are we going to do that next year. But how do we expand this now to start thinking a little bit bigger picture over the next 5 years? And that's what I want to discuss with you real quickly.
And in the corporations, the last 2 corporations I worked for, we did not have annual budgets. I mean, everybody has an annual budget. What we really had was rolling 3-year budgets that were updated 2 or 3 times a year, so that you were never sitting around saying it's budget cycle time, it's okay, we've had this rolling thing now, we want to lock and load it for the next year, because publicly traded companies, you got to deal with the real world too. But I mean, a rolling process is a much more astute way to do it, to keep people focused on things like Jackson talked about in his memo. You know, you can actually, if you have a rolling process, talk about where we go in the future.
I think it helps overcome that learning curve as new board members come in. It gives you some credibility as you're moving into your role as a board member that the prior boards have strategically thought out what the next 5 years looks like. You still have the opportunity as a board to switch direction a little bit, change it up and move it in a different direction, but at least this gives you now a little bit more opportunity to kind of think bigger picture and not reactive to everything that pops up in town. So what I've included in your packet is a outline for a proposed strategic planning process for the year. And what triggered this is during one of my CCMC manager meetings, our corporate vice president of communications presented to us a community survey database that has multiple different sections or categories of the different services that we provide to communities throughout the United States. And it gives all kinds of different questions that you can select from. And then it also benchmarks against other communities. So the database is collecting the data from all these different communities and would allow us to then say, what do we look like from a satisfaction rate compared to other 4,000 plus home units within CCMC, their portfolio. So what we looked at, and when I heard this, to me it tied in perfectly with what you all are proposing with the sustainability study with Dr. Mitchell from UCF. And then I believe that there's been a lot of talk throughout this year of how do we make this more of a big picture thinking and less reactive to what's happening now and what the important issue is this week on Facebook. So the sustainability study is really that investment that allows the CROA board to make sure there's sustainability and it's kind of stamped. And so anything that's studied and documented usually has more credibility. So once you have that to show that you have enhanced operational procedures, policies, platforms that result in a sustained operation excellence for our association, the new board members come in knowing that this is there, that infrastructure is there and it's where it's supposed to be. And you don't have to spend a lot of your time up front trying to figure out whether or not you're comfortable with that and you're okay with that. You have some sustainability there. Then you look at doing an annual community survey, and we're proposing that you do this around a time frame of voting for elections. And we put a campaign together where we tell the community, if you're only going to do one thing that relates to CROA this year, this is the one thing that you should do. You should get out and vote for who your leaders are going to be for this community over the next 2 years. And you should tell us what you think. This is your opportunity to tell the CROA board what your satisfaction level is in this community. And the reason why that time frame is important, because the next board comes in March, and then in April you start strategic planning for the next year and the next 5 years out. So the community will have an opportunity to really have their voice heard and put the leadership in place that will plan for the next 5 years for strategic session. Then your strategic planning should go into your budget. And I think a 2-year budget makes a lot of sense. Even if it's a 3-year budget, you can, at the halfway point, look at, are things still where we thought they were going to be? Did the strategic planning process change at all? But it gives us the opportunity to tweak. And it really lessens the time that you're digging in deep and asking questions on these budgets. So what I'd like to propose to you today, if you guys are bought into this, I think that this model gives you a little bit more sustainability. It takes you out of day-to-day thinking and it puts you into big picture thinking. I'd like to get another work session scheduled where we fly our corporate vice president of communications in. She can do a complete review with you of the database so you can see what the questions look like. You can start thinking about how we can implement this here in Celebration. And it will really give us an opportunity to get the community engaged and involved. And so I'll turn it over to you all for any quick questions.
And what time frame would that be?
It would most likely need to be in October, and if our schedule gets too busy in October, November. But we're budgeting now for next year. I would really like to get this in place if you all are going to do it. And so you're going to have the conversation today of whether you're going to fund the sustainability study. Some of these pieces will start falling in place. But if everything works out that way, I'd like to get this going for March of next year to do the community-wide survey, because your sustainability study will most likely be completed around that time frame. And then it'll be ready for a strategic session in April of 2019.
From your presentation, it sounded like the voting and participating in the survey would be at the same time.
Well, we have an opportunity to capture our audience because we're sending out the ballots.
When does voting start?
It starts in February.
Not in January, not the end of January?
It starts in February, beginning of February, and it runs through
Okay.
the first week of March.
So sustainability study, if it's done and submitted to have an impact on what would be on the survey, the timeline doesn't work.
Well, it would need to be
Timeline doesn't
completed by
work.
April. So it doesn't matter whether you do your survey first and your study second. It's just a matter of having them both done by the time you strategically plan, because you want that data to be available as you're talking about what your future looks like in Celebration.
Well,
I don't think
thought-
the sustainability study is a predicate for the survey.
I thought that's what you were saying.
Well, I have it as step one in here, just because it's something that you all have been talking about.
I know this comes as a shock when I say I like something. But I do like this structure. I like the fact that you're looking out over the horizon a bit more. I'm anxious to hear what Brian has to say this morning and how that impacts it. But subject to what we're going to hear, this idea of budgeting over a longer period of time, having a broader picture, is clearly something that I think we should be doing. And to Kevin's point, it's our first time through the grinder, and it will be easier for us next year, but it won't be easier for 2 or 3 new board members.
I would actually be a strong endorser of this process, because I'd like us to go to a rolling 2-year budget. If we go to a rolling 2-year budget, you're gonna have one group falling off, another group coming on or being reelected, but at least then, because we have too many conversations, like we've already started one down, like this morning, do we really have money? And when you think about money on a 1-year basis, that's just really dumb for an organization of our size. I mean, you don't even run your own home that way. So we ought to, we can't commit a board that we don't know if any of us are going to be on in 3 years, but we certainly can, for a 2-year period, talk about where the heck we're at. My recommendation would be that we revisit this at the end of the day after we've been through the money conversation all day, and you either have complete comfort or complete paranoia. But from that point in time, then we go to this, I would come back to this, because I do endorse it, and I would endorse a 2-year rolling budget that I think I would visit every 6 months.
We're really hoping there's not complete paranoia at the end of the day, but if there is, that's a symptom of our problem that we have in this community, which is why this is a solution to help us address that problem.
Well, I'll be disappointed if there's complete paranoia. So Steve, Susan, and I have had conversations, and where I tried to go with this was with a totally different package than their package, which I find their package to be about totally user unfriendly. And I understand what it is, so now we're putting something on top of it, which I hope is user friendly, and most of our conversation can focus on those 5 or 6 pages. Fair enough?
Yeah, absolutely.
Does the 2-year rolling budget require a change to our charter in any way?
You just adopt the budget annually, but you can have the 2nd-year budget on the shelf ready to go. I mean, it reduces, if we put that work up front next year, it'll help us in the following year. And I think sequentially years to come, it will be on top of the game.
As a board, we're only adopting a 1-year budget with a 1-year homeowners assessment fee, flat or increase or whatever we do. So it's no charter change at all. It's better information.
I think that what this does is positions us as a board in the language here, we're talking about enduring priorities. What's our long-range, large picture? I know we have that with our facilities master plan, but I think it really helps rather than as we gather in March, what are our priority areas for the year? Well, we have enduring priorities. We may have annual projects or annual initiatives. So I think it changes the shape and lets this board become what we have envisioned as our role. We're at the higher level, not the micro level. So I think this is helpful.
This is the time. You all have set yourself up for this type of leadership role. I think this is the time for us to.
And this is the time in the history of celebration.
I agree.
I mean, we're maturing and getting ready to grow again.
And
So this helps. I
thanks,
think this
Steve.
helps.
Thank you for being proactive.
Sure, absolutely.
Any further on this? Are we at 9:30 or are we at 10?
We're 9 minutes past where we're supposed to be right now.
So we're almost, so we're now at 10. Good job.
Okay. Again, Q&A time. Happy to take audience questions along with board questions. Yes?
Is there any way we can dim the lights? Y'all have laptops, we don't, and it's almost impossible.
We can
find
dim the
it's
lights.
better if
Todd's
the
on
audience
it.
can't see the numbers.
Thank you.
Is that better?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay, so,
I tell you, Brian, can we just move that screen that way? Because we've all got laptops, we can see the stuff. I can't see that stuff from here anyway.
I can hand it over, right? There's nothing better for you.
I'm so glad that people are acknowledging they
I have
can't
it all
see.
here.
It's that age, man.
can you see that better?
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Actually, drag your chairs closer if you want.
Yeah, you can sit in the middle if you guys
Drag
like
your
to.
chairs closer, you're not gonna be in camera.
You only do that when you go to the ARC meeting.
Okay. I learned how to budget at the last CCD meeting.
Motion to adjourn.
With that as background, everybody leave. I'm going to have whatever numbers I want.
Wow.
Okay. That is how they did it. We need an airline pilot. Okay. We're going to start with so I started with I built. So let's talk about what I tried to build. I had 16 and 17 actual on other files, 18 budget, 19 budget. 19 budget went through the process that Steve laid out. I did not change any numbers. The only place I got heavily involved in the number orchestrating, this is a newspaper budget. We didn't do a magazine budget. Steve and I spent a lot of time on putting together the magazine comparison in here, which we're going to talk about today. Okay, so the increase of 8.5% at $343,000 is a plug. What that means in English is that if we adopted the budget as proposed right now, the $930.32 or whatever it is would go up by 8.5%, and everybody would hate the CROA board. So I think one objective of today is to deal with the reality. My reality is, and what you'll see on another exhibit in here is I put 2% increases in other years, and since we now know that trash fees are flat, which is a change from what the public had heard before, but as we went through and started scrubbing numbers more, we just found a oops, and we fixed it. So I think 2% being about where inflation is at is really what we should have. I think to do 1 year up a lot and then flat a couple years makes the most sense. I'd just rather say if inflation is running 2%, let's just bump 2% a year. So in my mind, this number should be no more than 2%. Okay, so then you bounce down here and you said here, and we've got total net revenues increasing by like $204,000 because you got some negatives up here, and I'll go through things in a minute. Steve, bounce down to the next page a little. I just want to do something quickly. And on expenses,
Keep going.
keep going. Expenses are going up $258,000. So when you look at the big picture, this is kind of what I'd like you to see. So we've got revenues of $6.2 million on the page before. And if you can't read this, just make me do the numbers. So
Wait, can you pull a microphone closer to you so that people watching can hear you and us too? And truthfully, I can't read a thing that's on there.
Okay.
So you're gonna have to walk through it, I'm afraid.
Okay, so revenues, $6.2 million. That's on page 1. Go up to page 1. You're just going to have to go back and forth.
Gotcha.
So that $6.2 million is right here. All right? Reserves are 1.6, right here, 1.6 million or 26% of that. So one of the things I want you to focus on here is it gets I've heard stories in the past about how people got very focused on $7,000. Focusing on $7,000 is a complete waste of your time, so don't go there. What I'm trying to do is make a big bird point. Reserves are 26%, 1.6 million. CJC, which is right here, is $1 million. CJC is 20% of our budget. We're going to talk about CJC in a minute when we get there, but when you look at those two, it's 46%. Landscape, can you bounce down just a little? Landscape right here is $800,000. So we have had the conversation in the past board meetings where Kevin and Jackson and Vaughn have said, I've been surprised. One of the pages that Susan put in the package was 2018 and additional things, but what I want Todd to do for us is say, okay, I got landscape of $800,000. Here are the pieces that add up to the $800,000. We have a final budget that adds up to $800,000, and here is Hippodrome Park for $46,200, and it comes up next year. You can say, I saw it. It's so what I'm looking for from Todd, and I doubt if we have it today, here's the park, here's the month, it's going to come to a total of $797,676. We've got it for the next year. We're fat, dumb, and happy. And that should take care of a whole bunch of things you're talking about. And I'm gonna want the same thing for the reserve study. So literally in board packages for next year, we're gonna have a reserve study package that says this is what was gonna be spent. We're gonna have support for this number here, and everybody can look at it, you can check it off, it went up, it went down, there's valid reasons. Okay, so that's 13%. Trash, 786, it's another 13%. Then, bounce up just there. Oh, down, I'm sorry, I apologize. Okay, then I took, wait, you're fast.
This is the expense.
Yeah, I'm gonna be half and half, okay. So I took this package here, starting with like maintenance, 306, 252, 173 is water, recreation staff, manager admin, and like maintenance and electricity pool. Those all kind of go together. That is another 1.3 million, or 20%. If we just understand those top 6 or 7 items I'm talking about, we understand 92% of our budget, or 5.5 million part of 6.2. I'm not saying there can't be something stupid on here for $11,000, but drop down to the bottom line expenses. What I really think is dumb for us to get in too much a habit of, you know, if I take monitoring expense, you know, it's 8.2, 8.6, 7.9, 8.8, you know. We can probably spend countless hours on it and save $50. It's just not productive. You know, so really we've got these certain things here. So when you think about the big picture of the budget, it's really important that you understand reserves, CJC, landscape better, which Todd's going to talk about. You know, trash is an in and out. You know, there's really not a lot for us to do on that number, but it's a big piece. And then we got a couple, those 3 or 4 categories, and you've nailed the whole budget. So that's my thought process on how we should really attack this. Now let me look at the other things I had here. Okay, so then I said, going back all the way to the top, and again, stop me with
Debbie has
anything
it.
where I'm going too fast.
I'm sorry, is there a way to focus that on Brian, because I don't think anyone's seeing him? Can we just adjust
The
the
camera?
camera a little bit?
The camera's got this whole area in the picture?
Are you in? Okay, just make sure you're in.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so going back to this $343,000 right here. That's the 343, and I call it deficit versus 2018. As a reminder, our budget and our actual for 2018 were close until we had the problem with landscape, which was the bills that didn't get recorded. Susan has been working on that. We are going to have additional expense this year beyond a shadow of a doubt, and that'll get filled and it'll just be done.
Do you know what the final expense is gonna be in?
Well, I know, yes, I do. Wait, let me do the math. I know what the number is.
But that number's not gonna be plugged into this budget, though.
It's not gonna be plugged.
No.
Oh, never mind.
And they're going to accrue it at the end of last year, so it's still cash comes out of our accounts this year.
All right, I hate this accounting.
I
So we
know.
won't spend, they're gonna do incorrect accounting. In my world. Okay, so anyway, let's stay with the big picture on the budget. 343 deficit versus last year's. Really, there's a couple of, the driver is legal fee income here. So if you look at this, right here, on this line, it was 40,000 in 16, it's 40,000 in 17, it's 43,000 in 18, and we budgeted 0 in 19. Now, the argument in the past has always been, we hate to put fee income in here because, and say we have an income item coming from taking people, but I think that's silly. If we've always had it coming every single year, I think it ought to be there.
But can I add for this, though? You've changed from the past where you were doing, you pay as you go to your attorneys. Now you're not paying attorneys anymore. So your legal expenses are gonna go down, even though you've added $75,000 worth of projects that are gonna skew that number right now, but we'll talk about that when we get to it. You're not collecting legal fee income anymore. The legal fees
Not at all.
are going back now to the attorney as opposed to you.
So
So
it
you
should be
don't
zero,
pay
you're
the expense up front anymore, and you don't collect the legal fee anymore.
So it should be 0, you're saying?
So it should be 0, but both are 0. The reason why your legal fee expenses are so high is because there's a sub-account called Board Initiatives, and we put all 3 of your projects in there that are $75,000 worth. I fully imagine those are gonna end up in the parking lot today, but we'll talk about that when we get to it.
Okay.
Can I stop you for 1 second? I just want to go back. You're talking about your 343,000?
Mhm.
Where is that It's at the increase amount, is that
So
what we're
that's
talking
the
about, the 342, 887?
That's the 4364 minus the 4021.
Okay, great, I'm sorry, thanks,
So that's
appreciate
just the
it.
increase, decrease.
Okay.
Okay.
Brian, one clarification. The budget column 2018, is that projected for 2018, or is
It's the
that?
actual budget. There is not a budget. I don't mind, but there's no rolling updates.
We can certainly
Comparing
get that.
the budget to a budget, and the budget's not what really is gonna happen, and we've got 3/4
The
of the year.
budget is pretty, through 7 months, it was pretty reliable with the exception of the landscape management issue.
My point would be it's a change we should make for the future.
In a perfect world, I'd said it in an email to the board, we should be sitting here projecting actual. We shouldn't be working off budget at the end of a year.
And that's what will help you with that 2-year plan.
And-
Is we have actual
and-
plans.
and my-
Otherwise, you're shooting yourself in the foot.
I got it.
Well, the other thing I would say is you get the actuals every month in your monthly financials, so you're seeing them. But I completely understand wanting to see that big picture, and if we need to, I can work on putting one of those together for you after this meeting. Again, this isn't a final budget
That
today.
would help, but
I'm not sure it's the most critical part of getting this thing done, but certainly for the future, it is a process change that would be helpful. Okay.
So just to clarify, to bring it back again, remember, we're doing budgets for dummies here. This $342,000, $343,000 shortfall, using the budget numbers that are here, is the first task for us to identify how we want to get at that. Am I correct? Is that what we're trying to do? And your analysis is, don't get caught up in the weeds, stay with the big items, work from there to start to figure out how to shave that down.
Mhm.
Am I following you so far?
Yep.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay.
I have one question. So if you're comparing budget to budget, how do you know what the actuals for 2018 are year-to-date and projected to the end of the year, and how that relates to your budget? I mean, if you're doing budget to budget, but you're 50% over budget.
Okay. As I just said with Mike, and it's an important question. At July, we know budget for revenues and budget for expenses was very close to actual. So we actually, the budget as it's built has budget for each month, and actual versus budget is, through 7 months, is very close. And really, we only have one area where we think we're gonna be different, and that's landscape management. And it may be by $100,000 or $200,000 because of past invoices that did not get recorded, and there's a dispute with Davies and Proscape, and that has to get fixed. But most of the budget is pretty good, and I think the landscape number down here is actually pretty good. It's a roll-up of the old one where we had to spend monies to fix things that didn't get there, and a dispute about what they're responsible for and what we're responsible for. So we're not off by the 50% you're talking about. If we were, we'd have to do an actual projection.
And one more statement to that. We do have the actuals. We look at them every month during our review of the financials. So if I was to forecast out the rest of the year, most of these expenses are contract driven, especially the large chunks. My forecast is gonna be, we're gonna spend what we said we were gonna spend through the end of the year. Now, there's gonna be some areas where we might have said we needed an extra $1,000 to do this, and we did it for $500. I mean, it's gonna be pennies that we're gonna end up finding. I mean, we are, unless we're off.
The budget numbers we're comparing to are materially correct, and you can be comfortable with that.
Just a question, back to the legal. I know we changed on the collection attorney, but as far as Slayton, don't we have?
We still have that budgeted as an expense. And when we get to each GL line this afternoon, you're gonna see and you have these in your packet, but you'll see a complete detail
Okay, but
listing
it's-
of what
but
those
it's not
expenses
under
are.
this-
Well, this is
It is.
An expense, but it won't be, will it be under the expense?
It's
item?
under the expense.
It's under the
There is
expense,
legal
okay.
expense down there,
Okay,
yes.
yeah.
And so what Brian's talking about, when he says a 2% inflation every year, 2%, just so you have an idea of what that looks like, it would take you to $949.33 annually in assessments. So that's about $53.67 per house different than where we are with this budget right now, which is about $231,908. So the $342,888, that's where you are sitting right now with this budget. If you wanted to get it down to a 2% increase, you're looking at shaving $231,000 off of this.
And I'll,
And just, again, just to clarify, the landscaping booking, how will that impact the 342? Does that number already incorporate yours?
it's already in there.
You've already assumed that we're gonna book those
The
dollars.
past fixing of the past expenses,
Yeah.
I think you just take it out of surplus.
Okay,
Thank
all
you.
right,
So we've got the surplus, I think we just take it out of there and call it unfortunate, for lack of a better word.
Well, you wouldn't have had a surplus if we would have just paid it, but we, as management, won't pay something that we don't have. We did our due diligence, we checked to make sure it was done, and we just dispute it. We don't believe that the work
I
that
understand,
they're
but it has to be,
billing us
it has to be
for
in
is.
the books.
Right.
So, okay, I just want to make sure it doesn't impact
I
this
personally
number.
believe if we get an invoice, we should record it unless
Right.
we know it is
Right.
grotesquely an error.
Right.
Because when you don't record invoices, guess what happens? You get surprises.
Yeah.
And I think that was an error.
So we can trust that this number, so the bottom line is that we can trust that this number we're working with to try and nail down is highly accurate.
Yeah, and,
Is that fair?
and I'm gonna tell you where I think we ought to go get
Okay.
stuff at. Okay, so we're back here to, when you, at least difference versus 18, you got 43,000 of that, you got deficit surplus, which is an important thing to know. Last year's budget had 30,000 of deficit surplus, which is a nice way of saying they included 30,000 of revenue. Out of surplus, they were out of budget by 30,000. It's not a bad thing at all, it's perfectly fine, and they let that roll forward, so that's a difference. Bounce down just a little. Okay, now you will notice that recreation fee apartments is got a $61,000 decrease in revenues. I have not included over here intentionally because we have talked about this in the past and I'll repeat it now. Recreation fee apartments and working capital contribution there make up this 622,068 here. So a reduction up there is just a reduction, and you can see the 62,268 here. I mean, there's little rounding differences. So that is why you don't get excited there. So the reduction here just results in a reduction here. So that's,
What's the reason for the reduction in
Solar?
the solar?
Yeah,
Primary
solar.
$61,000 all for solar?
Part of that, and then when you look at Brian's categories here on the side, that say recreation facility management, or facility, management, that category, every time it says that, is what's used for the formula of, what we, how we charge apartment recreation fees.
Because it's everything in one pot.
Everything in one pot, yep.
But there wasn't not a reduction in the rate for the,
no, not.
It's actually gonna go up
It
because
actually
of
goes up.
solar.
There's less people in the pot.
Right,
So solar is not only an eyesore, but it's an expense. to
yeah,
us.
and they're costing everybody else money.
Okay. Now, remember how I had talked about how I wanted to break reserves out? We went back and forth with Arizona, and what we agreed to, and it's GAAP, is gross revenues, 6.2 million, contra revenues, which is a nice way of saying a negative revenue, and I'm familiar with contra accounts from my past. So there's where I got the reserves, so we come to net revenues of 4.6 million. So this is the presentation I'd like to have going forward, because I think it's the more accurate, and it helped us see the $6.2 million. Now, the expense decrease of $258,000. I wanted to really look at, okay, what are some of the major drivers of that? And here they are. Okay. And you can take notes because you won't be able to read it. So, athletic complex. We've got $72,000 of additional expense for the athletic complex. Just, it goes live March, April, lighting, monitors, all that type of stuff. It's not an expense item. Steve included a little bit more revenue, about $9,000, $10,000 of revenue. We talked about going higher, and we agreed we wouldn't go higher, because if you have you'll have more revenue in 2020, you're also gonna have more expense for a full year in 2020, and the reality of the matter is we need to get through 2019, get the fields in play, find out who actually rents them, how often, what the rates are, what the expenses are. We shouldn't budget panacea, we just need to have them in existence for 9 months to a year and become wiser. So we've got 72,000 of expense, which is a new expense. We didn't have it in 2018 related to the athletic complex. CJC has got an increase of 57, and I'm going to go to their budget here in a minute. Landscape has got an increase of 44. I'm assuming Todd can talk about that in spades. Park dumpsters for 32,000. You'll remember when we found the trash error and made the fix, it was, okay, it's flat, but we have to pay for the dumpsters in the parks, so that's 32,000 of new expense. Charter revision, we've talked about a charter revision in 19 being the year. 25,000 is in the budget for that. Master plan, we've talked about renewing the master plan. 25,000 is in the budget for that. Performance, sustainability type study with the professor, we've talked about that. 25,000 is in the budget for that. And the engineering study, because of the replacement reserve, remember how we said every 3 years we gotta do one and next year's a year? We have 21,000 in that. So if you take these items, you got $301,000 of expense that is in the 2019 budget that is not in the 2018 budget. And then it's 258 doesn't equal 301 because you'll have pluses and minuses going on and stuff like that in other categories. But when you talk about the major items, and for those of you who want, I've got this in an email format that I can email to you on an Excel spreadsheet, so you don't have to drive yourself nuts. But you know, if we said we wanted to do every one of these and keep them in the budget, they're in there now. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so what else do I want to say? Drop all the way down to the bottom for a second. So I kind of went through the big picture. This breaks even at a negative $1,700 versus last year's $3,000. Does this give you a good flavor for the CROA budget? Questions from the audience or out here?
So, again, to clarify, your suggestion, Brian, is that we ought to focus our inquiry today on the items on that white pad that you've got.
And reserves. I'm gonna talk about reserves in the next few pages. I think we really should concentrate on reserves. I'm gonna make a strong argument that I think we're way over reserving.
Okay. So we could theoretically pretend that we're CCDD and take all of the excess out of our reserves and not raise any assessments.
Wait till I do reserves and present an argument, because I do not want to, we're over-reserved. And I want to argue, the argument I am going to make to you is that, let me make my argument when we get to that page. We'll get there. Let's go to CJCC. Okay, CJCC. First off, everybody knows what CJCC is, right? Does anybody not know? Okay.
Just say it for people at home.
CJC is the organization on top. It's got 3 Disney guys and 2 brave CROA volunteers as a board. It oversees CROA, it oversees CROA, CROA, and everything. Revenues and expenses are here. 75% of their revenue comes from CROA. 25% comes from CROA. The other items that are in there is they've got $300,000 in newsletter income, and they got miscellaneous income of $10,000. This is going to be, the next page after this is going to be our newspaper conversation, and newspaper is what matters here.
Brian,
So-
can I jump in real quick before you go to that next stage? So
Take enough
just
time
a
for me.
little bit more clarification. CJC is a joint committee umbrella that was formed to share cost, so that it can be funded 75% from CROA, 25% from CNOA. So all these expenses that you're going to see on here are expenses that relate to both CROA and CNOA, and they're shared at that higher level. So the board or the committee is made up of the TCC representatives and the 2 CROA representatives, but it's a ratifying body for the expenditures of these dollars that hopefully are going to be approved here throughout the next couple months.
A couple other things with CJC, it's hard to really put it into a couple of words, but CJC signs overall the company contract for Celebration. TCC turns around and is the end-all be-all voice for certain things. They could change certain things, and that original agreement was actually less of a percentage. So CJC and the budget is 20% of our end, and it's something that we definitely need to look at.
Mr. President, could I ask for a 5-minute recess for both a bathroom break and a chance to go look at that board and actually
Sure.
see what's up on that white sheet?
This would be a good point, because we're an hour in,
That'd be okay?
Which board? Oh, this board?
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
Yeah, yeah.
sure.
so 5 minutes.
Let us mute the camera real quick, so if there's any side conversations, it's not being live streamed or recorded. I gave you fair warning.
Steve, I don't remember on this, but this is reflected, but last year I think you said you covered the water tower,
Thank you for calling the break.
Yeah. Yeah, you did me a big favor, Jackson. Otherwise, I was gonna let you get up here and talk. Let me see where Kevin's at. Okay, one thing you will see with truth in advertising is you'll see things like what happened with me and Steve. I was in Rhode Island, I was in Baltimore, Steve was somewhere else in here, and we were all in different places, and we've been going back and forth, and the one reason this went out on Friday is we finalized newspaper and magazine late Thursday because we had many moving pieces to that story. And it is, I told you in the past, it's art, it's still art when we get to that. So, it went out late, and if we correct each other, that'll be life. Okay, so I want to talk about CJC again. So we got the contribution from CROA and CANOA, which is straight 25 and 75 of the underlying budget. We got the newsletter income, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. And we've got reserve fund, which and miscellaneous income, which are kind of immaterial. Okay, so when you look at the expenses there, you got staff payroll, and when we talk about covenant staff and a lot of that type of speed, you know, that is people right here in this building with CCMC. A lot of CCMC stuff is at CJC, and it's not on the CROA when you talk about human beings. Member communication and programs has a lot to do with the newspaper. And then we got management fee, the CCMC, which was per the contract. And then you got really, the other big items here is you got like D&O insurance, general liability insurance. There's a few major things that go through there. And that's kind of what happens here. So when I had said over here, CJC 57, that 57 really comes from there. Can you bounce down to expenses for 1 second? Expense is up about $25,000, which is, you know, heavily member communication and programs, and then we have less revenue. So what I recommend we do actually is we can look at underlying stuff here if you want, but I would recommend we go to the newspaper. The newspaper.
Yeah. And do these numbers represent 100% of CJC or are 75%?
No, 100%.
So we're actually responsible for 75% of these numbers, is that
You go
correct?
up here.
And historically, CROA board always approves the CJC budget first. CANOA follows the lead.
Body.
Well,
For
it has
the-
to be, it
Well,
has
that's
to be
not true.
approved by
Isn't
CANOA
that-
and by
isn't that-
CJC. It has to be approved by all three.
Yeah, it gets approved by them, but
So
basically.
we approve it, CANOA approves it, then CJC approves it,
Yeah,
is that the
and
process?
CJC is just stamping at that point.
CJC 's
But
pretty
we're
much-
doing the work, we're doing the lifting on it.
Right.
Yeah, they've always kind of relied on CROA to take lead on this, and then, because these are a lot of CROA initiatives, they're
Right.
taking a portion of the cost of it. And then at the end of the day, they've, in the 4 years I've been here, they've approved all of these budgets.
So just a quick hypothetical. If CJC did not exist, these expenses would be rolled into the CROA budget at 100% rather than the 75% right now that we actually fund.
Absolutely. Some of them would go away because you would not have the staff being split 75-25, but you are correct, yes, that would be in CROA's budget.
Then Canoa would have its own budget.
Yes.
And for those of you who are good at math, the allocation from CROA here is 1036, and on the CROA budget, it's 1057. The reason there is a difference is because when we did the $32,000 worth of trash fix-up, I did an allocation on the CROA budget for that. They didn't because we had timing differences, and we'll true that up on the next round, but on my round for CROA, I got the whole thing there. Okay? So that just, it's an obvious thing. If you go from one budget to the other, there'll be a difference. So let's bounce down to the newspaper. Okay, so we spent quite a bit of time here, and I think this is an important decision that whatever we do will get killed, so we just really need to go over the facts and make our decision. All right, so what we did was we had the as of May 2018, and we got the CJC 2019 budget. Budget, originally Steve had done 2 budgets, and it didn't make sense, and I said, no, we're gonna do a newspaper budget, that's where we're at today, and then we're gonna look at the difference with the magazine. When we had done the original, now as a refresher, in 16, it was 337,000, actually in 15, it was like 345, 305. This year, we're projecting about 240. pro forma in the 19 budget, we got 300, and we had 15,000, because remember, it's 5% for that contract. Over here in the budget, we kept that 300 and that 15. So pardon, same revenue, we didn't change that. When we looked at staff existing and staff new, when we did it in May, and in May, we did a high level, this time more detail has been done. You know, we had about 87.5 versus 42 with the existing. For existing employees, we do an allocation of time. That difference really represented an allocation of time. With this year's budget, it actually was 80,000 and 32,000, getting into the details. So it really wasn't too bad. New staff was estimated at 55, it came in at 46. We didn't have delivery before, so delivery here is now about 11,000 for both magazine or newspaper, because you gotta deliver it. Graphic consulting, you'd have, and I'm over here, you would have 5,000 in consulting. That would go with the magazine. If you looked at like printing, postage, and advertising, they were all very close. Storage would be there with either. So you kind of come down to your conclusion. Before, we had said that the pro forma newspaper would be a profit of about 5.3 with a loss of 27,000 with the magazine. Now we're saying newspaper is a profit of 27.21 and the magazine's a loss of 34,888. I think 19 numbers are better because it's actually been done off of an actual budget. We just got better information.
But, okay. Quick question.
Go ahead.
The pro forma revenue for the newspaper is projected at 300,000, but our newspaper revenue has been going down every year. How do you get back to 300,000 revenue?
Because we have not been hiring this new staff person whose job, and did exist in the past, was to do more marketing-oriented type stuff.
We've held that job waiting for a decision so that we can determine
When did
which
that
direction.
employee end?
October of 2017.
So it has been almost one full year.
But we did have family and medical leave on that employee for quite a long time prior to that. So we've almost been 2 years now without that.
So basically, we've hit that point where we've got to just make a decision. If we're going to keep the newspaper, we got to hire the person and we got to commit to it. I actually did the break even, and the break even I think was between these two. It's actually in my notes that Debbie has over there. I think the break even's about 280,000 in marketing. Okay, so Steve made the point. So here, Steve hasn't heard this, and he probably won't agree with me. He said there could be savings if, with the magazine, if the CC has the duties of the eliminated position absorbed by other in-house staff of $49,000. I tend to think that savings of $49,000 should be there regardless. If we can we could outsource, we could keep the newspaper, outsource the graphics, and for the same thing, and then have that same $49,000 of savings. So to me, I think the differential between the newspaper and the magazine is still real. If we've got a graphics design person that we don't need 100% of them, then I think we ought to just make that decision. And if it can be absorbed by other people, we absorb that, and we use graphic consulting for the newspaper just like we would for the magazine. That's just my opinion. If newspaper revenue went up to the 337, we'd have an extra 35,000 in income, so that this differential of 37,000 would be up to about $72,000. So it's almost, in my opinion, impossible to make an argument that the newspaper is not more profitable if you believe we can keep marketing revenues in the 290 or higher range. If you think marketing's only going to come in at 240 and that's the real number, we should do a magazine. And to me, we know we did the survey on the newspaper and stuff like that. To me, you have that, you have the economic reality, which I believe, and you can correct anything I've just said, but we spent a lot of time on this, getting it to where we're at. To me, this is the economic reality of where we're at. And at some point, we as a board just have to make a decision. And I'll take any questions.
I think that there's an economic reality, but I also think there's a question of what business do we want to be in. I think the presumption in these numbers is that we can hire the right person, get them in place, and they're gonna do a good job, and they're gonna sell ads, and we're gonna be able to collect on those ads that have been purchased, and we're gonna make it all work. And if all of those pieces fall into place, then yes, it's a great idea to have a newspaper from a profitability standpoint, if that's our goal. If our goal, however, is to be risk-averse, the risk-averse structure would be to take the magazine, let them carry that burden, and get out of the newspaper magazine business, which is not CCMC's primary business, I think. And I question whether or not it's our primary business. It is a communication tool. It would be a little bit, to me, like saying, hey, you know what, we're doing the website redesign, but you know what, we could really do some cool stuff on our own if we went out and hired somebody and we took it all in-house and we could sell advertising on our website and we could be a website developer. Well, that's not our business. That's not what we're here to do. And I think that the survey that went out didn't have the complexity and the nuance that you've just provided, Brian. It didn't go anywhere near that. It just said it's going to cost $30,000 more for a magazine, which was a quick and easy way to explain it, but not a truly accurate way. It assumes a lot of things, and while there was a lot of detail in the material, I doubt if most people read the material, particularly those that voted in the first 30 seconds after the survey came out. And so, to me, this is really not about the numbers. This is about a decision about whether or not we want to be in that business and take that risk, or we don't want to be in that business. Because if we want to be in the business and take that risk, then your numbers are right. Do the newspaper. But if we don't think that that's our primary focus and our primary business and what management should be doing and where we should be putting resources, then why don't we outsource it like we would outsource anything else where we're not expert?
And to add to that, if we talk about keeping the newspaper in-house, I'm going to passionately argue against Brian's statement that we can contract out at $5,000 the graphic design, because for the newspaper, we are running the newspaper. We're setting it up, we're building it, we're helping some of the advertisers with their graphic design.
I did not say 5,000. I said.
Well, no, but that's what I'm assuming based on what that cost is.
On the process codes for the individual, I'm saying that the amount for the individual, which was quite a bit more
Yeah,
than that.
and well, bottom line, we can't provide the same level of service as we're providing now for the newspaper without having that staff position here. Now, if we contract it out, it's a different conversation.
I mean, we also have a lot of risk if we look at the magazine long-term, because if you look at that 3-week year contract, we are turning over all of our ad revenue. We're turning over 100% of that base. And when you look at the magazine, we're just gonna do this nationally, I think it's gonna risk our local advertisers. I think it's gonna put a risk on that long term, because once you reach that actually the rates are only guaranteed for a year, so we don't know what rates are gonna do after that. Also, the cost of the production can change. There's a lot of risk in the contract for the magazine. I still favor the newspaper.
I think we need to, didn't you say there was an increase in the cost of printing the newspaper?
It is, it's about 5% increase?
And it's in there. It's in there already?
6%, it's already been accounted for.
It was like newsprint.
Okay.
It's reflected, I think.
I'm gonna echo what Jackson said. I don't know if we're in the business of doing newspapers. We're an HOA. Now, is the answer to go to a magazine? I don't know. Is the answer to go to outsourcing? I think it is. Whatever media they print is another thing. The thing that I'm curious about, I mean, we as residents are paying for 75% of 20,000 copies, so that way the majority of them can sit downtown for the businesses to get their advertising. Of course, the newspaper is still a media that we use as residents to receive information and pass that communication. The CJC budget is 75%, 25%. Is there any way that we can communicate with CJC and CROA and say, hey, for the newspaper specifically, it really does help both of us equally? Is there a different way that we can make that budget work? Can we do 50-50? Would that ever be an option?
At the last CJC meeting, the newspaper was discussed, and they said, go with God, make your decision.
But would they chip in a little more, is what I'm saying?
It would be a complete rework of the
It'd be
budget, because
different.
you'd have to take the revenue and the expenses out of the CJC budget and split them equally 50-50 at once. I don't know what that looks like without doing it.
I look at this and I see equal commercial and residential communications coming out of there. And I just see a lot of time coming from the residential component about this topic, which is our resources, it's our board, we're going around and around and around on this.
Mike?
Let's talk from here, Doug.
Go ahead.
Okay. I hear a lot of talk about our side, the internal side, and looking at the numbers and trying to figure it out. I've talked to a number of you, and I've not heard anybody say it, and I'm not convinced yet that you've got the best possible deal and negotiate the best possible deal with the magazine company. Because if this is primarily a cost obstacle or barrier, you go back to the magazine company and say, this is gonna fail because we have this barrier, here it is. How do you help us close that gap? And I think we should get longer than a 1-year guarantee on rates also. So I just don't have comfort that you've negotiated the best deal you can with a magazine company.
I will say, we did talk to the magazine company, and we got something that was unprecedented, and that was a kickback on the initial revenues, wasn't it?
Well, they originally offered us two choices, either $1,000 a month guarantee or a 3% on every sale, right? A 5% on every sale, and I asked for both. I said, I want you to guarantee me the $1,000 in. When you get over $25,000 in revenue, then give us the 5%, and that's what they agreed to do.
And I'm not convinced, I mean, the magazine is slick, it really is a great piece. We would be proud of it, it's something that would send a good message from Celebration. But then again, I get a wife that has the look and feel of the newspaper is what she wants. And I hear from some of the other residents, that's the same thing. That don't change it if it's not broken.
Well, I want to make sure we have this part of the conversation also. It's a newspaper in look and feel, but it's not a newspaper, it's a newsletter. And we have been calling it a newspaper for years, but we don't have any journalists on staff with journalist integrity. We have, it's a newsletter.
I tried to
It's a
submit an
feel-good-
anonymous op-ed.
was ready to kill.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's feel-good stories for the community. It's mostly recreational stuff and special events things and what good things the foundation's doing. It's a newsletter, and that's what it should be called.
And that would be, I mean, obviously it's geared towards the community, it's the tradition, and even though, I mean, you go into the other places, there's magazines all over. I mean, at least it stands out, it's tradition, it's what people are used to
Sure.
seeing. I know it's a newsletter,
Yeah.
but going to a national format would change. I think it would change the feel quite a bit. Even though we're providing the stories, it still says they have the right of refusal.
No, it would be completely your content. It would still be driven by
But in
us,
the
what's in
contract,
there.
in the contract, it says they have.
I don't believe that's at all.
But in the context of this
It's
budget
100%
discussion,
Yeah,
under
let's
ours.
focus back on the budget.
but in the context of the budget discussion, I just want to be as clear as possible that there are assumptions built into this, that if those assumptions are correct, these numbers are correct. If those assumptions are incorrect, and there are many variables, both human and numerical, then these numbers are wildly off potentially and should not be used as the basis of the decision making. I think the other things that we're talking about, whether it's tradition or look or business or the businesses we want to be in, this is where, you know, the numbers guy and the narrative guy probably come at it differently. I don't think this should be a numbers decision. I think it was a mistake in the survey to make it a numbers decision. I still think it's a mistake to make it a numbers decision. And it should be a conceptual, directional decision that we as a board make, and then we take our lumps one way or the other. And if we as a board say, you know what, we like the idea of the tradition of the newspaper and the newsletter and so on, okay, but let's just call it that. Let's not say it's a numbers decision, because I just don't think it is.
Okay, 260,000. I did where does the magazine and newspaper break even? It's 260,000 of marketing dollars.
Okay.
So if you hire this person for $46,504 and they generate $20,000 in additional revenue, it's break even from where we're projecting this year. And anything above that is gravy for the newspaper. There are other factors in it. And at some point, I think we've talked till we're blue in the face.
Yeah.
At this point in time, the numbers we had before are materially correct. You can talk about this. We all understand the marketing risk. To me, This is a little bit like being pregnant. Once you decide you want to keep the newspaper, you're gonna have a baby, we need to go hire people, we need to deal with the real world of that situation, and commit to it for a period of time.
I agree. I'm just asking what the basis of the decision will ultimately be, and I'm asking the board members to decide not on the, if we decide on the basis of that screenshot, that slide, the vote is for the newspaper. I mean, there's no way around it. I'm suggesting that there's a different calculus that should be made, a different paradigm, a different model for making this decision. And if we make the decision based on a different model, then I think it's an open question that we could reach a different conclusion on. And that's all. I mean, I just think it's a difference in how we want to manage the philosophy here.
When are we gonna make this decision?
I'm ready to
That's
make-
my question.
You know, I'm ready to make the decision now. I know you brought up the numbers that might be wildly off, but I looked at the 2016 numbers, the revenue was $337,000. 2017 was only a partial use of the advertising person. We still had $305,000. I think the $300,000 level is easily sustainable, and that does make sense that the newspaper should prevail.
I just want to say real quick though, for anyone watching at home, while the board may not be voting on this today, this isn't the official vote, it is the direction. This is that one voice nod that you're giving management on how we build this budget, because I have to build it one way or the other.
PJ's over there.
Go ahead, PJ.
I just have a quick, it seems to me, on just the discussion on which way you want to go, seems to be like comparing apples to oranges, because we're talking about a quarterly magazine and a
No, it's a monthly.
Monthly.
A monthly magazine.
Yes,
I thought
absolutely.
was
No,
No, it's
it's monthly communication, same format, different format obviously, same materials, same articles, same everything.
Okay,
Everything-
so here's what I'm trying to get to, that on our revenue sources, we basically have two types of, ad givers, okay? We have your real estate market and you have your vendors. And the vendors are fairly stagnant, they all have the plumbing, or they all have the this, and I mean, if you follow it month after month, it's pretty much the same ad, or very little difference. The real estate is different every month. However, we all know in today's market, that is, by the time it's printed, it's probably inaccurate anyway. I mean, that's the fluidity of the market. So I'm just thinking that there might be a compromise which will eliminate or bring into question, as Jackson said, the actual numbers. And I agree, it shouldn't be a numbers decision. It should be a strategic decision on where you want to go and how you want to do it. And I worry that if we continue to do it in-house, that staff that we have is going, and I say this working on one of the committees, that it's going to be very difficult, I think, for management to put any more load on the staff that we have without sacrificing the quality of the time that we get.
Which is why we gotta hire the person. We know if we keep the newspaper, we gotta hire the person.
Yeah.
I mean,
And to that point, I guess philosophically, I'm in favor of reducing the footprint of management wherever we can do it. I think that we are, in some cases, too reliant on management. I think we then get management trying to do on our behalf things that they are not well suited to do. And I'll go back to my example of a website designer. As a board, we said, let's go outside and find somebody to do it. We did not, though previous boards had tried to do it in-house. We made the decision that this was not the highest and best use of the resources that we have. I would say that in this instance in which, rare though it may be, that Steve Waring and Jackson Mummy agree on something, we agree that
More
this...
than you think.
Yeah, more than you think. We actually like each other. But that at the end of the day, something that allows us, Jack, to reduce the footprint of management, and that they are not saying, oh no, don't take that away from us, but in fact saying, look, we think this is not our best use of our resources. This should be really almost a no-brainer conceptually. It's only when we throw the numbers in and we make this a black and white numbers decision that it gets dicey for most people. Not everyone, but for most people. And to the extent that we think those numbers are totally what's gonna happen, okay. But I can create and have created 3 scenarios already today that say that set of numbers won't happen.
But they're still doing the work for it, they're still doing the articles, they're still doing the content. We're basically giving all of our ad revenue over to a national, who very quickly, when these one-year contracts are up, are gonna turn it over to things that we don't even have in our community or that aren't even relevant.
Well,
Because
that's
it's
a
easier for them
presumption.
when they're doing.
Yeah, that's a presumption that I don't see in the contract, Debbie. I've read the contract. I don't see it there. If I'm missing
If you have a
something.
But if you have a national magazine, what are you gonna do? Are you gonna target to the local advertisers, or are you gonna do what's easier and go to the Ace Hardwares and the Home Depots and the others that are just?
I just don't see that in the contract.
Yeah, they're not, the magazine, and so an advertiser has to determine value for the dollars that they're gonna spend. They're not getting national exposure, they're getting celebration exposure. It's gonna be, the magazine company is going to sell advertisement to the local advertisers because that's the easy picking. That's the low hanging fruit from them. They gotta get their 25,000, that's what they're looking for every month. And if I could throw one more question out there, not to muddy this up anymore, but if we consider, if you got your assessments down annually to 949.33, which is that 2% that Brian alluded to at the beginning of this conversation, and you could still do a magazine and provide the level of service across the board that you want to provide, do you think the homeowners really would know the difference? I mean, it's not about $7 a door anymore.
Yeah.
It's that we framed that question the wrong way, in my opinion. This is about annual assessments for homeowners more than anything.
I don't think there's any golden path. I mean, I think the survey says, and the numbers say one thing. I understand your arguments, and we're probably gonna end up with a 4-3 vote, and it's gonna go one direction or the other. And I think the longer we put it off, the worse we make it for ourselves, because in the back, we're just gonna have more fun.
Well, you want a board voting speaking with one voice.
No,
Would you just ask for
in a moment.
non-binding
I want to
vote?
see if Vaughn has anything to say.
I just don't want to see us make a decision to say, go with the paper, and then CCMC hire somebody, and then down the road, next year, everybody decides they want it, then they gotta let that person go. We need to be thinking ahead, what's the best thing for the community, and make that decision.
Okay.
And not just on money. I mean, I know some people like to sit in the morning and feel the paper in their fingers, but I don't think we should be basing our opinions on something, our votes on something like that. I think we need to look at the big picture for the town.
Yeah.
And whatever way you go, you think is best, then.
So to me, it's like for me, it's a four-legged stool. One is, and this goes to the point of newsletter, I think most of the work is already in-house and would stay in-house in any choice. Because it's our articles, it's JR pulling things together, that is local, that is not contracted out. We're not going to a syndicated article or writers. But the other 3 legs is what we've talked about. We talked about the money. We've talked about what we sense is good for the town. I mean, that's what we're elected to do, being strategic. I think that was your point also. And then from the survey, the comments were overwhelming in the newspaper direction. So to me, there's 4 parts. The resident comments, the money, being strategic, and again, we have a communications vehicle that's really primarily, I think, on JR's shoulders. So I guess the question is, how do we resolve, it's not a vote, or is it a vote? Or is it a?
Well, so
Can we-
ultimately,
I don't know,
whatever.
it's a direction, maybe a sense from each of us.
Let's be perfectly honest. At the end of the day, we got to vote.
We're gonna have to vote.
It's no different than CCMC contract last year. People just had to vote, and they take the lumps,
gotta do
good
it.
or bad.
Let me
And
paint the
that's where
picture
we're
for you,
at.
though. Here's the thing. You would give us consensus today to build the budget one way or the other, which essentially would hopefully be your vote when it actually comes in front of you, because if you
Right.
vote differently, then I have to go back and redo the
Right.
budget again.
Okay,
That's
so let's
what
give
the
you a
bottom line
sense,
is.
let's give you a head nod to,
I would ask for a roll call.
that's fine.
I think a roll
Let's
call
do
is
it,
fine.
let's do it.
I
Huh?
mean, it wasn't noticed.
It's not an official vote. You're not
not
officially
an
doing
official
it.
vote.
You're
It's a
giving me
direction.
direction on how to build this
That's why I'm
budget.
asking for
A roll call.
So that each person
That's
can
fine.
identify what their position is.
That's fine.
My
And you
judgment's-
hope it's the same when we actually vote.
And the roll
which would
call
be-
will indicate how we're gonna go forward with the budget. How's
Yes.
that?
That's correct.
Okay, I'll be happy to go first, David.
Please.
I'm gonna vote for the newspaper. I'm gonna respect 2 things. I'm gonna respect the survey we took. I'm going to respect the numbers, which I think we can make the 260 I alluded to. And I think
we have to commit to, whether it's a magazine or a newspaper, we have to agree that we're gonna commit to something for 3 years, because then I think then we've done the fair thing,
Okay.
and we can always agree.
Thank you.
I support the newspaper for tradition and representing the residents, and I just think in the long term, once we get past the contract, it's gonna be the better option.
Okay. I'm going to come down the same way for the same reasons.
You're the deciding vote.
I'm the deciding vote then. I'm gonna go with the newspaper for the dollar reasons right now. I can't see where we can put another $37,000 expense on the homeowners and divide it up as dues. It just doesn't make sense.
Doesn't matter for.
No, but
Oh.
you want to voice an opinion? Or not?
No, everybody should voice an opinion. If it's 6-1, that's a lot different than 4-3. We need to know where that's at.
Well, it's the same as it was last time. It was the 4-3 vote for the newspaper. I don't see it changing. I understand your concerns about the survey. I don't put any credence in the survey because of what happened. What was done there. I don't know how many people ever even looked at the magazine, the celebration version. I would virtually say probably a very tiny percentage actually even looked at it. So I don't, I would go with the magazine just as I think it would be an improvement. It would be a nice, classy addition to the town, sitting in the newsstands. Some of the places that will not accept the newspaper because of its format, if its material, they would take this. Somebody said that, where was it that they put?
Hospital?
Was it the hospital? They won't
think
take
so.
the paper because of its.
Multiple pieces and.
So I'm just
Yeah.
thinking, that maybe this would be just a nicer look for the town. It does cost money. I mean, it just depends where we want to spend the money. But I would say the magazine.
I would say the magazine. I think that it makes a better impression. I think that I would put myself at the front of the line of tradition and keepers of the flame. There's nothing traditionally attractive about a newsletter that's printed okay, but not great. And I think that we're actually pretending something when we talk about it. It's not a newspaper, as has been pointed out. It's a newsletter. It's not the highest and best use of the staff at CCMC. It's not the thing we do best. And I think we got pushed into a position here by a small and relatively vocal, very vocal group of residents who then got a survey that then got its thumb pressed by giving a number that said it's this many dollars. And if I were running for election, maybe I would view the same way that Jack is, that I don't want to be raising any prices and I want to be able to keep dollars down. But at the end of the day, I don't think we're here to admire our reputations or to say, oh, look at us and what we've done. I think we're here to make decisions about what's best for the community. And what's best for the community, in my view, is to limit the footprint of management, to get them doing the things they do well to the best of their abilities, and to not spread them out doing things they don't do well. And if Steve doesn't have the magic touch and doesn't hire the right person and doesn't sell enough advertising and can't collect on that advertising revenue, then we are exactly what we were discussing. A year down the road, we're saying, oh my God, it's not working, we're losing money, we got to get rid of this person, we got to make a switch. There are so many things that we are taking on in the way of risk that for a board that is generally risk averse, this is a very strange decision. And I'm afraid it's a decision that's being pushed because of fear of a very vocal group of residents.
I appreciate that we finally separated, some of us at least, have started separating in-house to third party. And that conversation came to light today more than just the media that it is. I don't think we have a landscaping team. I don't think we have other vendors that we choose that are good at what they do. And I would be in favor of the magazine for that reason. Clearly not the popular opinion, and that's okay. But I must say, it is an extremely impressive piece. The survey claims that a lot of people saw it. We've learned otherwise, and that wasn't the case. but they're two very, very different pieces. The information in them is the same. The dollar amount always matters, for sure. When it comes down to tradition, though, this is the original one. And I thought that was something funny, that the Celebration Journal, the very first media printed here, was a magazine. So to say that our roots are the newspaper,
It's actually Xerox, that came later.
I'm sorry.
But yeah.
It wasn't a newspaper.
Mimeograph, probably.
In any event, I would say that it would be something that I would have rather discussed with CROA and the commercial entities and see how we could work on those numbers better. If this was the make it or break it to increasing assessments, I probably would not be in favor of that, because I turn around and say, do you really want to increase assessments just for this?
Yeah.
But before getting to that point, I would be in favor of it.
Okay. We at least have a process for proceeding with the budget. Next page.
And I just want to make sure that management's clear. We will not be bringing back any future agenda items to approve a magazine. We'll be moving forward with the newspaper budget. The next time you see anything that has to do with this will be October 24th to approve this budget. So you've already voted down a magazine once before. So if residents ask, there is not an agenda item for this again. It's a dead issue at this point. Unless for some reason one person flips between now and October 24th, then that's the direction we'll be
Because
moving.
the agenda item as proposed 2 months ago was to make a change.
Correct. And if you're not making the change, you don't need to bring it back to vote. You don't need to post it. It's just approving your budget now on October 24th.
When would you have to hire that other person, Steve?
Well, we haven't budgeted this year to hire someone, so we could move forward tomorrow if we knew that this was the way it was gonna move forward.
What do you mean you haven't budgeted? You mean the 46,000 is not in your budget?
No, it is. That's what we could. We could proceed tomorrow and put it out and hire.
It's in your 2019 budget?
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
I think that might need to happen then.
Pardon?
I think that might need to happen.
Well,
This
we're
is the
moving,
direction it's
from
going,
this,
then
from this decision, we're moving forward with
Then do it.
continuing the
Right.
newspaper.
Okay, reserves. Now I want to talk about reserves, because at the end of the day, this is where I think we get our money. And I'm going to present an argument. I want lots of conversations from everywhere. So, we're all familiar with what I've been presenting at board meetings. We've got the replacement reserves, which we all know what those are. For the stuff in place, that's where I want to charter revision so that this stuff really truly does become restricted. And then we've got funds that may be commingled. Today, that is capital improvement, contingency, and surplus. My recommendation is that we get rid of surplus, and I'll explain that in a minute, because it's just out there and it serves no purpose in my opinion. Okay, so at July, we had $4,058,000 of comminglable. We had $1,239,000 of restricted, $5.3 million in total. Stop me with any questions. Susan went through and did the roll forward. You'll see remaining net inflow outflows for the budget being the 250 here, being the 435 here, so 684. You'll see athletic fields at $1,670,000. That's a new number you've never seen before. Bounce down to the athletic fields. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Keep going. Okay, so here's this page. And this will go in your board book for the future. So here's the $3,000,004 that you've seen before that was approved by the board in January. $625 for the building, stuff we've been doing. $40,000 county engineering fees, and there are updates here where Steve's got new information. County transportation fees, $69,000. Duke Energy at $100,000. Environmental wetlands at $7,000, and a contingency at $250,000. Okay, so that equals a total of $4,491,000. That today is our best estimate of what it will cost. You can see we have broken this out September through May. The $1,670,000 right here is what would be spent through December of this year. And when I bounce back up, that's the number you'll see there. You'll see the $2,821,000. That's what will be spent next year. And when I get to another page, you'll see the 4,491 times 50%. I know the county's not done yet, but I've built this budget as if we're going to get that. And when you see a page later, that's an important assumption.
So if you take the 2,821 minus the 2,245, you'll see the 671 or whatever the number is on a later slide. Does everybody understand this page?
Good, very helpful.
Vaughn, don't pass up here.
I think this is a good example of why we need to be diligent the next time we have a big ticket item like the community center, because these figures that, this project that was voted on by the previous board, if they knew that this was gonna be a $4.5 million project, would they have voted the way they did? So this increased significantly, I think, from the prior numbers that they were basing their votes on, I think. So I think we need to be very careful that we don't underestimate what these costs are going to be.
That was a get-out-of-jail-free card that you fought hard for, and we should all appreciate that.
I 100% agree with your statement. However, I can tell you, we think this is a pretty good number now.
Well, I'm not saying
we've
it's
been
wrong.
down-
I'm
no,
thinking
no,
it's a good number.
Your point is 100% valid. I think from a budgeting perspective, we've got a pretty good number, especially with the 250 contingency in here. And we have, you can see I've got 26,000 in contingency in September because we've already had something come through. That was actually a real number. So contingency, somebody might say 250 is a flood. Well, we've already started off with crap happens. And it's gonna continue to happen. That's not an insult against anybody, it's just the reality of projects. Okay, can we bounce up to that page? So as a refresher, so this is the negative 1671 that you saw on the athletic field page, which ends the year at 4,313,000. So let's bounce down, Steve, to the next one. Okay, so what I want to talk about now is the working capital fund accumulation. Because this, I think, is critical as we go through the budgeting process and critical to some of the stuff that you were talking about when I started an hour and a half ago for my 1 hour section. Okay, so 1,127,000, I'm right up here in this right-hand corner, 1,127,995, and right off that prior page rolled forward. I'm taking the surplus number of 1,000,002 and adding it there. I don't think, the reason, my recommendation for the board is that we ought to put a number in contingency. Can you jump back up? And that's real. Too far. So we got 483. So if the board said we want to keep 500,000 in contingency, I'm happy with that. I mean, we should have a number for a hurricane. We should have a number for stuff, tornado, whatever it may be. And I personally, I think 500,000 is a pretty nice number. And that's just money the board has when you need it. We just had a problem with landscape. I mean, stuff happens. So I think we as a board ought to be committed to, we want to have like 500,000, and I can listen to any other number you want to give, that we're going to get there. If we take money out of it, we're going to put it back. And so that way, we can say that we're prudently managing the financials of this organization. Surplus to me is really money that should be in capital improvement, because then it allows us to be fair there. This monies can be commingled. We could always make a business decision that if we had to take 250,000 out because of some grievous problem, we could take it out of there and move it over. But, you know, again, this 1,127,000, if you bounce down, Steve, is right there. I would add the 1,000,002, it was slightly over. I'd put the 13,000 in the other and get to the 500,000 of contingency. The 575,500 is the athletic complex. That is that number less the reimbursement that was on that other sheet that we showed you a couple of minutes ago. So then if you go with, now the 930.72, I kept it flat here because I said I wasn't going to increase it by 2% without board feedback. But then you'll see it goes to 949, 968, 987, $1,007 per household. Steve had talked about the other $18, that's the difference here, and you could push that up 1 year if we wanted to do plus 2% this year. Estimated resales at 300, or an average of 25 a month, and what we've done historically. So resale contributions are really 930 times equal to 279. New home sales, you can see we've got those coming online here. That's Island Village. You can see the Island Village at the top. So you got a total contribution there. Prior mortgage contribution, the 310,200. You got the apartment fee contribution. You'll see the 342 goes to
588, goes to 704, 718, 733. You've got Island Village, you've got Sola. You got Island Village coming on the line in 2020. You got Sola coming back in 2021.
Where did that
How
come
do we
from?
have that?
Huh?
Where's that?
Sola coming back?
Where, are we
2021?
just guessing?
That's,
Well, that's a
It's
guess.
gotta be, yeah, we really don't have the. exact
I
time
didn't
frame.
think we could just say never.
You know.
You can argue with it and disagree.
I mean, you're talking about 300 units at around $300 a unit. That's your total number.
You want to, I have a,
I don't know, but
I
Well,
know
it-
litigation.
And again, it's,
I'd
it
rather
it
not
doesn't
have it.
drive your
I'd
assessment
rather-
total, it
I'd
just
rather
drives
not
your
have
total
it.
amount you have in here.
and if we get it, it's a surprise, but.
And
okay.
It'd be a nice surprise to have,
If we
if
want
it
to,
came.
if we want to change the
I know,
assumption,
yeah,
we can
it's
change it.
small
Let me
things.
talk about how we built it. That's what we did. So then, what I want you to understand, and we heard about pickleball courts earlier. I told you the story about the couple of residents have talked to me about they'd like us to pay for the sidewalk cleaner because it would help the whole community and stuff like that. You got this 1,127,000 growing to 2.7 million, growing to 4 million, growing to 5.6 million, growing to 7.2 million, growing to $8.8 million by the end of 2023. Even if you said you wanted to build a building, a community center, I've heard Jack say 3.5 million. I mean, so if you said 3.5, you still got you got a lot more. If you want to throw on 100,000 for pickleball courts and a tennis court and a playground and some stuff like that,
6 million.
we're building up substantial money, and at some point in time, I question if we have to build it this fast, or if some of our priorities should be to slow down this build up a little. And then let me take you to the next page before we get into this conversation, so take me to the next page. Okay, then I want to talk about replacement reserves. So we did the 2006 study. I hurt my arm when we moved, so I have to use my left hand, because my right arm is killing me. Okay,
Power third.
so the reserve, this is per the reserve study, like what they thought we should have reserves at the beginning of the year, what they thought we should contribute, estimated interest, anticipated expenditures, and what they thought we should have at the end of the year. Well, if they think we should have 530, we actually had 969. They thought we should have 383, we've actually got 1,020,000. So we're overfunded to the tune of $750,000 at the end of this year. I believe that I believe, first of all, that as we put new things like the athletic complex into place, we should be taking some of this reserve money and running it into operations, because it is that development of money on the prior page that is leading to this new expense, and we should support those out of that new expense. I believe we could easily cut 100, so going back to my $343,000, I believe we could easily cut a couple hundred or even 250,000 out of the two reserve categories and still be extremely strong financially. I believe.
Then you're done. You can just go home because that's your number that you're trying to get to.
Well, and then if you increase 2% this year, and with no trash, I really think we should increase 2%. I think it would be wise, again, this is my opinion only, but I think it would be wise to start getting into this inflation habit. Inflation is real. I don't think ignoring inflation is the right way to proceed. So to me, if you do the inflation adjustment, if you take 250,000 out of the reserves, which, could be, can you go back to the other page? Yep. So I think we're over reserved there, clearly. And clearly, we're building a strong thing there. We can talk about the county reimbursement. That does matter. I don't want to mislead there. But I think there's enough money to complete the athletic complex. I think there's enough money from a priority standpoint to take care of. I agree with this, and I think I would actually take certain things out of the replacement, or out of these working capital, like maybe the master plan should be funded out of there, and maybe the engineering study should be funded out of the other one, so that we're funding them out of the right source anyway. A lot of money here. Let's get the priorities straight. I think we'd be smarter as a board to just say, let's get the master park update done quickly, and then let's figure out where pickleball courts versus tennis courts versus an artisan park, and the timing of a new building fall, money is not the issue. We have a ton of money coming in. It's really prioritization. This is why I am a strong advocate for a rolling budget, because if we're sitting there looking at this, the other one, I like having a cushion on the replacement reserves. I think we should be over-reserved just because it's prudent. But we don't need to be over-reserved by $1.2 million. I think we could all agree with that. And here, you know, if we ended up with, instead of $8.8 million, if we ended up with $7.6 million in 4 or 5 years, we're still gonna do everything we need to do.
Or at the end of 5 years, we have zero.
Yeah, I mean, at some point in time,
You gotta spend the money. It's-
yeah, at some point, I think that's a fair comment. So where I'm at is, you know, I'll make it easy on people like PJ and Dury. I think actually I would give them a full budget, because I think those things make a difference in the community as we're doing other things. Newspaper versus magazine, I just think is make a decision and move on with life. I think we communicate the 2% rule. We show people we're still strong financially. We do the Parks and Master Plan because I think that will make people think, okay, their funds are being used for productive things in the community. I like things like the pickleball court and stuff like that, because then we can say we're taking care of the kids, we're taking care of the older senior citizens, we're doing all these periphery type events. We've got financial strength, and you've kind of heard my whole pitch now. So at this point in time, what do you think?
What number would you recommend we keep in these reserves? What would you
The
suggest?
replacement reserve?
Yeah.
We'll bounce up to the reserve page first. So my recommendation would be that the contingency should be $500,000. And the reason I say $500,000 is because it's $17,000 more. We've got it. I think, having learned the lesson of the invoices there, having learned, you know, there's a Hurricane Florence is blowing out in the Atlantic now, and we can't sit here and pretend that the next one
She's not
won't hit
welcome.
Florida. We
She's
gotta
not.
have money. I think $500,000 is a smart level. We've got $6 million of revenues. You know, that's a little less than 10%, but it allows us to be intelligent. Then I would move this over here the way if you can bounce down.
So just to be clear, you'd move the surplus of 1.2 million into the capital improvement reserve fund of 1.127.
Right. So that, and I would keep this at 500, so I'd take the 13, put it on top of there with a.
How about the replacement? How about the far left? What would you,
Okay, I'm gonna get to that, so
Okay.
bounce down.
But that's restricted, right?
yeah,
Okay, let's go down one more.
Yep.
So here, to me, what I'd like to do here is, we're over reserved by 737, but we know we've got the athletic complex coming on and stuff like that. So I would probably be comfortable, in all honesty, with our overage there being funded at about 500,000. So I think we could take 237 right out of there. And if we're over
But that
funded.
doesn't change your vote on the newspaper? I mean, give me a break, Brian.
I told you my reasons, good or bad.
Okay, fine.
Yeah,
I-
Jackson,
what-
you do bring up an excellent point there. I mean, now we're going back to the newspaper and magazine again.
Well, we haven't done a final vote, but we
Right.
can at least build a budget. Okay, so I would take, I would,
Brian, I think there's a $300,000 difference. The $1.1 million there, projected year end, now go to your other replacement reserve year end, just scroll up.
There is a difference.
This one?
Scroll up right there.
I see.
Go far left, $1.4 million at 2018. There's 300,000 more projected there than the other one.
Well, here's your $1.1 million, right? And this is it's 249,000, right? Remaining inflows,
Well, I think the
outflows?
expenditure is where you're off.
That's your difference, your remaining outflows.
Yeah, but I've also got to pay $200,000 of new invoices. I don't know, maybe the math there, it's a good math error then.
The balance as of 2018, December 31st,
Balance down.
after you pay that, is $1.4 million, and the other sheet we're showing year end is $1.1 million.
And
Puts
from-
112, and then this is
Here's where the
112.
667 is what we have to take out.
Oh. She, in the package here, this is where I pulled it from. You had a different number.
We had talked about a different number, and Todd and I went through and calculated a number.
Do you want to look at that? Because
It's
it's,
either a good find or a bad find, I don't know which.
You got one or the other.
this is it right here, right?
667.8 is the anticipated expenditures through 2018 2019, and those are
Bounce down.
things that are scheduled in the reserve study. We actually went through the reserve study and we said, these are the things that are approved, these are the things that have been approved, that we haven't seen the expenditure yet. But these are the things that are scheduled, either in 2017 or 2018 that haven't been done. And then we just, 75,000 was
The answer is, if we don't do all those and the number is bigger, as Mike indicated, the overage is even more.
Exactly.
And we need, and in full transmission, I hit the road on Friday and they were making changes. We went across each other. Okay, very valid point. So, but again, so for this group, bounce down one more.
Down?
Up, sorry.
Gotcha. I think I know where you want to go.
Okay, keep going. I think the overreach, whatever, I think the overage should be $500,000. I think if we're over by 500,000 versus the 383, I think we're fat, dumb, and happy. If that gives us 237, or if it gives us 437, then we've got a lot. At that point in time, I would, and you know, this is in the replacement reserve, which is a restricted fund, so you can't take the money out. Really what you should do there is then you can reduce the contribution into next year. As we do the new engineering study, we are going to find out we need more in the future, so it'll help us if we're a little more over that way. So we can find things from a budget perspective here of so in other words, at the 343, if you said we're finding 250 of it right here, and then if you bounce up to the next page, and if you said we could take 100,000 out of it here, you're at 350. Literally, you're in balance. I think you can get in balance off of those two things right there. You could take the 250 off the one thing there and just say you're going to reduce the contributions going in next year so that you get to the point where you are 500,000 over. When we reconcile the numbers, that puts us 600 or 700 over. We've just got help going to 2020. And if we took 100,000 out of here and said we were going to take that out, we found 350. We're literally in balance right now.
And so 350 is high though, because you said at a 2%, 232,000 is really what gets you in balance at a 2%.
We as a board have to decide, do we want to? Steve will do it better somewhere else. We as a board have got to decide, do we want 2% inflation? My recommendation is yes. That is not in the budget, so that would reduce the 343. We got to agree, do we want a 500K overage on replacement reserves? You'll have to excuse my writing. Steve will type something better in a minute. If we do that, then we know that creates 250,000 or more. And then, if we take the other one, which was the capital, and we create 100,000 out of the capital, we can balance the whole thing easily. We can go through the rest of the expense categories. We should, as prudent supervision, do that, but we can get this whole budget in balance. I think it makes sense because we're moving things from working capital by creating new expenses, from putting the athletic fields and stuff in place like that. So you remember I had like the 73,000. If we take 100,000 out of capital and do that, we're really funding the running of the athletic complex, which I think we should do. We're over there, it's 250. At least it's a benefit this year, and as we go forward and get the new reserve study, we can make those decisions, and I think it puts us in pretty decent shape.
And just to be clear, none of this is contingent on getting the county money. In other words, if we didn't get the county money, would you still make this same recommendation, Brian?
Can you,
Yeah, hold on, I'm just trying to put a placeholder there so that you can.
if we did not get the county money, actually go down to the athletic. Keep going. The county,
capital.
keep going, sorry. The county's in here for $2,245,000. So if we bounce up to that working capital page now, right here, if we didn't get the county money, we would be lean here. We'd be 400,000 or 500,000 over, but we'd still have all these future
flows coming through. So, you know, you go out here, you'd still have over $6 million.
The only thing we have to keep in mind is by 2023, that extra money, we can't count on it continually coming in. Unless Disney comes through with another Highland Village or something else, but right now,
Well, you'll.
it's
You
the
mean
last thing.
What, new home sales, you mean?
But you still
still
have
have
new
some.
Well, you
Still
still
have
have,
re-
at the
But not
way
with
it's
that.
You'll
built
have
right
resales.
now, the apartment recreation fees come every year, the mortgage comes every year, so do you have those?
Those are two guaranteed funding sources for the lifetime of
Right.
celebration. They're
Plus,
not going away.
plus it is written in statute with the change in sales of houses, so the
Yes.
300.
Right.
But
So
the
I mean,
Island Village influx.
Island Village
Not
is
the
an
solo.
influx and then it goes.
yeah,
But
but you, yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
If
So in other words, the resale
Oh,
contribution.
new home sales, yes.
The resale contribution right here does not go away, even if there's.
Right.
The new
but we're
home.
always
But the
gonna
new
have
home
new
sales.
homes.
Yes.
You know, we're not gonna have this, if we keep this here and the apartment fee contributions, you can see how much that
And we're still
grows.
good,
I mean,
yeah.
we may decide that we want those because we're going to do other things, but you know, you got $1.3 billion that's gonna be coming every year. At some point in time, if you build things out and you don't wanna do a parking garage or this or that, you may say that's too fat and you may reduce it some going into the future. That's something a board will tackle.
Kevin, I agree with you. You'll lose the new home sales, but it will also translate an increase higher than.
Of resales.
Resale.
Yes.
Okay.
You're
Yeah.
right. You're right.
But
What
if you
would
look-
the county money, what fund would the county money, if it comes through, go into?
It would reduce the working capital accumulation, so you go.
Probably
that
makes more
working
sense to
capital
look at it
page.
right here,
If you go up,
In here, this is where it would go, right?
right, so it would go through the capital improvement, and I had that roll forward, can you go to that roll forward page on the working capital fund? So in other words, Vaughn, this, that's CJC, down. Keep going, right here.
This is the,
So this 575 here was on that athletic complex page, was the 2.8 million minus the 2245 county reimbursements. So it's going through this working capital fund accumulation.
Can I want to add one more point to this. So these three funds here that Brian points out, these are not protected per se to where you have to have them for one particular reason. The replacement is to do your replacements on your existing amenities. These funds, Brian's suggesting you move your surplus just into capital improvement. You don't even have an extra category called surplus. But at the end of the day, the capital and the contingency can be spent on whatever you want to spend it on. So if you were to now take $17,000 and throw it into here in contingency, you'd be fully funded at your contingency moving forward. I have $40,000 in your expense line right now for contingency. That would go away. You could move capital dollars in there, you just save $40,000 off your capital budget, or off your operating budget. But this is the pool right here that you could decide at any point in time, if a hurricane hits tomorrow, you could pay it out of your $500,000, or you could pay it out of here. You have a philosophy, though, that this is for new amenities or enhancing amenities that you have throughout the community. But at the end of the day, you can use this money for whatever you want to. There's no restrictions on it.
Right, but one thing I agree with Brian on, and I mean, it's all at some, on the capital improvement, there is a certain percentage we need to look at to consider moving to operational, otherwise we're just continuing to, so what percentage do you have in mind?
Or stop giving
Well,
$310,000
I said
over.
I said I
Just
would move
reduce
over
it.
$100,000, and I would make that annual until we move more stuff over. At
Or
some
more.
point in time, as that other fund builds up to be too big, people will say, I mean, at the end of the day, we need to update the capital, I'm drawing up the master plan. If the master plan has 11 items on it, and all 11 items cost $5 million, I'm making up a number, then when we get $5 million, if we've got 6.5, to take Vaughn's earlier point, in that account, so that we can factor inflation and screw-ups into the process, then at some point in time, we got enough money to finish the master plan, and we either want a new master plan in the future, or we kind of fund that out, and we've got a balancing process that allows us to move forward.
How are we preparing for even the reserves on the new fields? You know, when they do the study next year,
That's
that's gonna be a big chunk, I'm guessing.
Well, the lifespan of the fields is gonna be 10 to 15 years,
That's
so
what-
you'll see that spread out across. It is gonna be a slight increase in your reserve
But that's why,
contribution.
how we're preparing for it is though, we said we would overfund that account by $500,000. So if we turn around and we do the athletic field and they say that the synthetic turf field has to be replaced every 10 years at a cost of $1 million, then we've overfunded by $500,000, then we've already got a strong contribution towards that.
Plus, you'll have, at some point, you're gonna build on every piece of property you have to build on, and you're gonna add amenities on everything that you can add, and you're still gonna have $1 million plus a year coming in resales and apartment rec fees. At any point in time, you can start lowering that 310,000 contribution that you have. That gives you that little chunk to play with right now.
And you can put it in a replacement.
Right, or you could just say, we're at a shortfall this year for maintaining these new facilities. We're gonna start using our capital dollars to now maintain these new facilities.
Can you bounce us all the way up to the CROA budget up top
Yeah.
here?
The very
So-
first one, right?
So this is how, keep going, right, wait,
Oh.
you're fast.
It's not cooperating, hold on just a minute. Here we go. All right.
Okay, so this is how you think about it. We got this $1.6 million here that we're putting into reserves today. So when Steve talked about the 40,000, for example, if we say we want the contingency at 500,000, then that 40,000 goes away. So it's no longer even expense. I hadn't thought about that. That's a good point. You know, if we sit there and we say working capital reserves, we're gonna drop to 522, then we've reduced this. So now we've reduced this by 140,000 up here. If we say we're going to reduce capital improvements funding by, and working capital by 250, the way we talked, you know, or 200 in that case, 210, we've totally balanced the budget and we're strongly
Brian, what
reserved.
if we looked at it this way, though? What if we said, in that parking lot page that I was just building, what if we said, let's look at what these costs are here? I think that the park projects, the shade structure, the pickleball courts, don't kill me for this, think about this for a second. I think those come down and they become part of the facility master planning conversation. Everything else that you're looking at funding, you fund with the surplus dollars that you have now. And then, you can take out $75,000 worth of expenses from this budget now and put them over in capital and just pay for them out of your surplus that you
Oh,
have.
I had said that earlier. I would take some of these and possibly
Right.
move them over.
Yeah, and just
So,
pay them as a
so at the end of
one-time
the
fee.
day, I would pay for the engineering study out of the replacement reserves. I actually think that's the right place.
You
to
have
start.
that sheet, right, with all of your extra expenses, and I did that whole parking lot sheet, we can make them line up, but you can see on here.
So if we,
Numbers 231.
okay, so we were gonna put the $100,000 to make that work. We could take the chart, you know, the master plan, the 25,000, we could literally pay for that out of the capital improvement fund. I would accelerate that as much as we can, you know, the
Times
engineering
three, right?
study.
I would do all three of those. The master plan, the charter review, and the performance sustainability. That's $75,000 that you can cut from your operating budget right now and just pay for with your surplus dollars. They're projects, right? They're one-time projects that don't necessarily have to be maintenance and operation.
Pardon?
We have to sit and discuss, you know,
Let's discuss that.
prioritize, but.
We have to discuss
Along that road,
priorities.
yes.
I just think, go ahead, TJ.
I just have a question because I'm remembering, maybe I guess I'm just remembering incorrectly, but it was my recollection that at the time the vote was passed several years ago to increase the capital contribution on sales and resales from 1 quarter to a year's worth or whatever the difference was, I think.
It was 1/6.
That it was presented as to pay for civic corridor and amenities. So what I'm hearing is that we've been funding planning costs out of operating for those items and not taking it from reserves? Is that why the reserves are so heavy?
No, not at all. So what we're saying is that your reserves has been overfunded. Expenses, we found savings on how to pay for certain things. We've managed those different projects appropriately, thanks to Todd and his team. And throughout the years, that has built up to where there's now a little bit of a surplus. What I'm suggesting, though, is that you have this extra money here. Instead of putting in your maintenance operation budget this year, that is driving your assessment up to over $1,000 annually, you move those one-time ticket items onto a parking lot. You figure out your big number that you're trying to reduce is it's $231,000. So if you can get that to $231,000 with big projects, which I don't think you can, you're gonna have to reduce slightly than your 310, 200 capital contribution, and then that'll balance your budget.
Well, I don't have a problem with that, it was just the wording on the motion that increased it, that's what I'm concerned about.
Well, so you have your actual amendment that does not restrict you. It was written to where you had the flexibility as a community to spend those dollars in other areas if you needed to.
Because at the time.
Right.
At the time that motion was made and passed, the focus was specifically on the civic center.
Yeah, and I would agree with you 100% if you were to say, we're not funding the athletic fields right now because we want to fund other projects in the community.
No, I don't.
And then I think you would have people saying,
I'm just concerned about the wording, because I don't have
Right.
that good of memory.
Right.
Of what the wording was 4 years ago when it was quadrupled.
yeah, well, the amendment that was picked, or that was voted on and approved, allows you flexibility to spend those dollars outside of just amenity enhancements. If you needed it for emergency, if you needed it to offset assessments, you can use it for that also.
PJ,
Jack?
let me just address, first off, the original contribution was 1/6 of that annual due. So we actually multiplied it times 6. But it'll include the civic corridor, but we also address needs over here at the athletic fields at the school as another priority as far as revamping that whole section of fields. I have no idea what the price is that gonna be, probably
Over
$1
$3 million.
How much?
Over $3 million to do it the right way.
Yeah.
But again, that's part of your facility master plan. We
Right.
have to compartmentalize these things. Facilities are gonna be prioritized by what the needs of the community are. And the needs have changed since I did this back in 2015 off of old data. Pickleball has risen. You're gonna see a push for probably shade at the dog park. You're gonna see different things that you didn't see before at all in the master plan that you have now. It's time for it to be updated.
Which is why I would recommend that we accelerate as soon as possible updating the
Yes.
facilities master plan and just have a accurate list for this and the next board of what the heck does community want priorities to be. I
Yep.
really don't care if we spend money on a pickle court versus a shade for a dog, but let's just have a priority list, go through. We got the money. My message to you is through the reserve stuff that I've laid out here, we could literally balance the whole thing. Steve and I can have an argument about whether we take the expense over here or the expense over here. It's the same dollar that we're putting both places. What we need the board to do today is get comfortable with the expenses in aggregate. You know, we talked about these items. The rest of it is really, in a lot of ways, repetitive stuff. If you charge us to think along the reserve structure here, along the $500,000, moving the other, Steve and Susan, I'm not traveling anymore until Thanksgiving. You know, we can argue about how we want to present it to you. We can give Jackson way in advance of his 5-day request, and you would have a new budget and I think the new budget, the question I would like the board to resolve today, if you agree with what I've been saying, is do we increase by 2% for inflation and kind of set that as a strategy going forward so people don't sit there and say, well, you've never increased it for 5 or 6 years, now you're increasing it, what are you doing? I think inflation is just real, and I think we ought to budget for inflation. And
Well, last year's board did budget for inflation, and
but we didn't put it in 19
No,
on
but-
here, you saw that one
But
page.
what they did do is they knew that the inflation amount that they budgeted for wasn't going to be enough to cover, so they used surplus to cover the rest. So that's where that $30,000 surplus is. You all are in a position this year where you can budget for inflation without having to use surplus to balance your budget.
Yeah.
Fine.
The 500,000 on your other page and your 2%, I think that's a great idea. And what I don't want to see is when we have, I'd like to see us have a comfortable cushion, but not an overly comfortable cushion. Because when we go overboard on these balances that we have, say the 737 versus the 500, I think we're holding money back from the community in building these things, or, you know, the shade or the pickleball courts. I think that's what our job is, to enhance this community and do things for the town with their money.
Right.
And not sit here and hoard it and collect it.
Right.
And not do anything with it.
Good.
I think it's a waste.
I
Good.
100% agree, which is why I'm saying 500,000 for a contingency, everything else is in that working capital fund. We do the master plan, we tally what the master plan costs, we put in a cushion. As we've learned, these projects are never cheaper than you thought they were gonna be. But at that point in time, you've got a new plan, you've got a new expenditure, we're certainly funded, and I think with using the overages we do to strengthen what we've got here, we've got a solution in front of us, it's pretty easy.
Brian, in a scenario where we didn't get SOLA,
Can we turn on the lights?
Yeah.
Go ahead, I'm listening.
in a scenario where we didn't get SOLA, or SOLA was delayed another year or two, Island Village was possibly late,
Go to that
an
page,
economic
Steve.
downturn, where would you?
So, SOLA,
That's not the right one.
I think SOLA's 90 a year.
90,000 a year.
right here. So, we've got this buildup happening. If Island Village got delayed, it would push this out a little. SOLA would push this out a little. We still have this money coming in. We still have this money coming in. We still have this base level money coming in, and maybe instead of 700,000, it's only 400,000 or 500,000. We're still building up funds. We are not in a precarious, oh my gosh, if this doesn't happen, we're bankrupt type situation. You know, 8 million, 8 may only be 6 million, 8 if SOLA doesn't come online and Island Village gets pushed out 2 years. You know, that's life. Maybe at some point in time, we say the project that was gonna start in November of this year starts in November of next year. That, you know,
A major economic downturn, though, usually the board switches their mindset from growth to sustainability at that point. You're not, I don't think the community would be as concerned about you not building new facilities if there was a major economic downturn.
So it's going in one direction, it just slows down.
And this is very important for you to hear. This money, that 500,000 for the contingency, and this money can all be utilized. So let's say we had a horrible recession in Island Village and SOLA didn't happen until 2024, and we had to take $1 million out of here to run day-to-day operation. We can do that. So nothing that I'm saying, I want you to come away saying we're anything other than financially strong. We are financially strong.
I think characterizing this particular sheet that we're looking at, the potential working capital fund accumulation, is probably the most dangerous document that we've put out, because it presumes a lot of things, rightfully or wrongfully. I mean, it's just, every budget has to make certain assumptions. These are pretty aggressive assumptions about everything working the way it's supposed to, Island Village being a wonderful opportunity on time and doing it, SOLA comes back rather than being razed to the ground, that everything's good, there's no recession. And the thing that scares me, candidly, is that somebody in the community is gonna say, look, $8.8 million by 2023. It's burning a hole in my pocket. Let's spend $8.8 million. We got $8.8 million. And all we hear for the next X number of years is we got $8.8 million. This should come with a kryptonite warning on it that says, this is a wild, it is our best assumption under the circumstances, but it is no guarantee. I mean, this is nothing.
I don't disagree with anything that you've said, but we should communicate this to people, because people don't know how financially strong we are, and it allows people, because people look at things like the athletic complex, they can look at pickleball courts, they can look at dog parks and stuff like that and say, are we going bankrupt? I mean, I've had people say, are we going bankrupt? How much, what are you gonna do to me? Well,
It assumes everything is going in the right direction.
Yeah.
But you know, the nice thing
I
about
mean, if we
this,
commit another 4.5.
it's money that does not have to be spent at a certain date. It's money that totally depend on the master plan. And the master plan actually lists out how much money is going to be every year available for each project. So that's where we
And
need
it's-
to.
I just want to go back, though. Last year, this board made a decision to do the ball fields, and the quote was, we've got $7 million in reserves down the road. And that was part of the justification. And to Kevin's point, had we known those numbers, had we known that 3 million was gonna become 4.5, you might have, you three and your four compatriots, you might have made a different decision. And when we end up relying on this one big magic number, whether it's for a park in Artisan Park, a playground, or pickleball, which we've talked about today, or any number of things, that will be the mantra that we will continue to hear. Well, I don't know why you won't spend $100,000, you got 8.8 million. And I think we gotta be very careful about that.
Can I just real quick comment on that? I think Jack, he touched on it, and this is the important piece that we have to remember here. And I think everyone moving forward needs to remember when it comes to these capital dollars here, this should be tied directly to a plan. And that's your facilities master plan, which is why, again, I'll passionately argue that you need to fund that today so that we can move that forward. The master plan can be put on hold. It can wait if something terrible happens in the community. These dollars in this doomsday scenario of Island Village and everything not happening do not tie at all to your annual assessment and to your operating and your
These are optional
maintenance dollars.
add-ons.
These are
Things that we-
projects above and beyond. And to PJ's point, this is exactly why the community voted to do this, so that you would build things. So I hear that the board last year didn't know, but they knew about $4 million was the cost of building the fields. What additional fee that went up was the building, and that had some changes to it throughout the last 6 months.
Well, wait a minute, what additional fee went up was the purchase of the golf course land.
And we bought the golf
That
course
was
property,
not
which was an
part of it.
opportunity that was presented.
So-
At the end of the day, our responsibility is to communicate clearly, and I think we are communicating clearly.
It's the whole,
We've been going for 2 hours here on my presentation, and I think we have communicated very clearly.
so I'm, just to wrap this around, I hear 4 proposals from you.
Okay?
Just, this is what I hear, see if I'm hearing it right. 2% dues increase.
Right.
Contingency, fund at 500,000, and just keep that at 500.
Right.
Combined surplus with capital improvement.
Right.
And then, just to clear, that restricted replacement, it's a little too much right now, so I don't know what the specific proposal is, but there's something about,
Not as much.
not as much, don't fund it as much.
Reduce the funding.
Yeah,
We
so
just
I hear,
funded or transfer surplus.
yeah, so I hear 4 different things.
What was the third again?
I don't know my order, but surplus and capital improvement being combined?
Maybe when we break for lunch, Steve and I can type something up.
But that's
Because
what I-
really, what we're saying, the 2%
2%.
will create capping contingency at 500,000 will create 40,000.
Right.
Moving 100,000 roughly out of the working capital to cover the athletic field expenses. And then we were going to take, reduce the contribution to the working capital.
Well, you have, real quick though, you have $75,000 worth of projects that I think can be moved off your operation budget right now.
You and I separately will argue
Okay,
about where we
So-
well, and then we have 40,000 that's coming off.
The 4 things that I'm talking about are pseudo-permanent.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just money for 2019, it's
Yeah.
2%, you're
Yeah,
proposing
I'm proposing a change.
a change
to
of
line things.
how we
Yeah.
organizing surplus and capital improvement together, contingency, we cap at 100, or 500K, 2% increase a year, thinking of that down the line, not committing future boards, and then not overfunding the restricted replacement reserve.
Just a correction, Brian.
Overfunding the capital.
No, not overfunding replacement reserve.
Brian, just a correction.
It's different than capital.
It's the
Stephen budgeted
replacement's
40,000 for
overfunded.
contingency.
It's overfunded.
We need 17,000 to build up to 500,000, so you're only getting 23,000.
No, but you have surplus though.
We
What I'm
have
saying is just
surplus.
move the
So we would
surplus
just
and then wipe
tap
out
it
that
out.
Move
expense.
surplus into that.
Okay.
But those are, and then you just want a sense,
Yeah, what we're looking for
That these are-
today is for the board to say, in the big picture, you agree with this concepts, and then
And you work out the
Susan and I
detail.
have got to argue about it, and then what we would need to do is come back to you with revised, and I'll call it Brian Kinsel
Right.
documents, that basically lay out, right out the bat, this is really what we did, and this is the changes we created. And I think we could do that probably in no more than a week or so.
Oh, absolutely.
And then we would actually send it to the full board, so that you can start looking at it and saying, okay, this gets us there. I mean, so I think it kind of works.
Yeah, everything else you're gonna see this afternoon is really probably just gonna be more educational for you, because I'm gonna argue, if you wanna cut that, you're slicing us to where you're gonna bleed. You're not gonna get the level of service that
So-
you're looking for.
So,
I have heard that the previous, and Jack can speak to this, Debbie can speak to this, and David was here last year. I heard that the last 2 years that the boards went through and kind of went item by item and did a lot of slugging around in the mud and tried to get a baseline budget that was pretty darn good. And you three can
That's
speak
fair.
to that. And if that be the case, then we're really talking about new expenses and how we categorize funding.
I'd rather use our time this afternoon to educate you on how we came up with that budget
Right.
and not worry about cutting those lines, because I think Brian's painted a clear picture on how you can get to your assessment that you want to
So,
get to.
so just trying to move us towards lunch, which is here. I've been so informed. Are we, say that again? I know we haven't done the 11:30 to 12 segment. Can we defer that until 1 or whenever we resume, or quarter of?
What was 11:30 to 12?
I'm done with, yeah, he covered everything that I was gonna say.
Department
He did
head
a good
review
job
of CROA budget, administrative and general expenditures?
We can push that till after lunch.
Are we okay? And time for lunch, do you want to go till 1, or do you want to cut it a little short to make up some?
I think that if you all are in agreement with the way Brian just framed this up, we can probably move pretty quickly through this afternoon and get you out of here before 5 o'clock.
Are we okay with generally where we are?
So enjoy your lunch, is my
Okay.
saying.
I
Please.
would like, when we resume, I would like to go back and revisit the 2% for inflation. I'm not
Okay,
wholly
okay.
convinced of the rationale there. So other than that,
So resume time, do you want to do 1, or do you want to do quarter of 1? Quarter of, okay? 40 minutes for lunch? Okay, quarter of 1, we will resume. Patrick, we're going to go off camera. Thank you.
Yeah, that was excellent, Brian. You did it all off the top of his head.